This channel isn't just about stories. It's about the people who experience them together. If you're new here, welcome, hit subscribe and join us. And after the story, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.
The marriage contract was signed in blood, but she wasn't supposed to be afraid. Rafael De Luca built his empire on fear and control. When he signed the marriage contract with the Romano family, he expected a polished alliance, a strategic partnership to cement his power across Sicily. What he got instead was a trembling bride who flinched at his touch, eyes hollow with terror on what should have been their wedding night.
The ruthless crime lord who'd never hesitated to take what he wanted found himself frozen, because for the first time, power felt like something ugly. This is their story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're hooked already, hit that like button. You won't believe where this goes. Now, let's begin. Buck. The Mediterranean sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Villa De Luca, turning the ancient stone walls the color of dried blood. Rafael De Luca stood at the window of his study, a crystal tumbler of whiskey untouched in his hand, watching the preparations below with the detached interest of a general surveying a battlefield. Because that's what this was. A battlefield. Not the kind with bullets and bodies. He'd seen enough of those to last several lifetimes. But the more insidious kind. The kind fought with contracts and alliances, where marriages were weapons and brides were bargaining chips. The Romano family has arrived, Capo. Rafael didn't turn at the sound of Marco's voice. His second-in-command had been with him for 15 years, since they were both hungry boys scrapping for survival in Palermo's underbelly. Marco knew better than to expect pleasantries today. And? Rafael's voice was flat, emotionless. They brought the girl. The girl. Not Isabella. Not his bride-to-be. Just the girl. As if she were cargo being delivered to fulfill a contract. Which, Rafael supposed, she was. He finally turned, his dark eyes meeting Marco's. Any complications? Her father looks like he's attending a funeral instead of a wedding. Marco hesitated, an unusual occurrence for a man who'd ordered executions without flinching. The girl. She hasn't spoken a word since they arrived, just sits in the car, staring at nothing. Something flickered in Rafael's chest, an unfamiliar sensation he couldn't quite name. He crushed it immediately. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when he'd spent the last decade clawing his way to the top of Sicily's criminal underworld, eliminating rivals and consolidating power until the De Luca name was spoken in whispers and fear. This marriage to Isabella Romano was simply the final piece of the puzzle. Her family controlled the northern ports, ancient connections that predated even the established crime families. An alliance through marriage would give Rafael unchallenged dominance over the entire island's smuggling operations. It was brilliant strategy, nothing more. Tell them I'll receive them in the main hall in 20 minutes, Rafael said, downing his whiskey in one swift motion. And Marco? Make sure everyone understands this is a celebration. I want smiles, not funeral faces. Si, capo. Alone again, Rafael straightened his tie and examined his reflection in the antique mirror that had belonged to his grandfather. At 34, he looked older, the kind of aging that came from carrying bodies and secrets in equal measure. His face was all sharp angles and cold calculation, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow from a knife fight when he was 17. Women called him handsome in the same breath they called him dangerous, and they weren't wrong on either count. But today, looking at himself dressed in an immaculate black suit that cost more than most men earned in a year, he felt something he rarely experienced: uncertainty. He'd never intended to marry. Romance was for fools and weaklings, and Rafael De Luca was neither. But when Antonio Romano had come to him 6 months ago, desperate and debt-ridden, offering his daughter's hand in exchange for clearing his gambling debts and securing his family's ports, Rafael had seen the opportunity for what it was: a chance to become untouchable. The Romano name still carried weight in certain circles, the kind of old-world respectability that could legitimize even the bloodiest fortune. Combined with Rafael's ruthless efficiency and expanding empire, they would be unstoppable. He'd agreed to the marriage without ever meeting the girl. Why would he? Her feelings, her desires, they were irrelevant to the transaction. Antonio had assured him she was well-educated, beautiful, and understood the expectations of her position. That was enough. Or so he'd thought. Now descending the marble staircase toward the main hall where his future awaited, Raphael found himself curious for the first time about the woman who would bear his name, and eventually his children. The main hall of Villa de Lucca was a monument to inherited power and acquired wealth. Venetian chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, while Renaissance paintings, some legitimate, others liberated from museums during the chaos of war, adorned the walls. Raphael's extended family and key associates had already gathered, their conversations a low hum of anticipation. They fell silent when he entered. Il Capo, someone murmured, and the title rippled through the room like a wave. Raphael acknowledged them with a slight nod, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on the Romano family clustered near the fireplace like refugees seeking warmth. Antonio Romano looked exactly as Marco had described, a man attending his own execution. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool October air. His wife, Gabriella, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. And between them, almost invisible in her stillness, sat Isabella. Raphael's steps faltered for just a moment, a hesitation so brief that only Marco, watching from the doorway, would have noticed. She was beautiful. He'd expected that from Antonio's descriptions, but the reality was something else entirely. Dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in waves, framing a face that belonged in one of the paintings on his walls, all delicate features and porcelain skin. She wore a simple cream dress that suggested modesty rather than celebration, her hands folded in her lap with a precision that spoke of practiced composure. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were the color of honey shot through with amber, and they were completely, utterly empty. Not defiant, not angry, not even afraid, just hollow, as if the woman sitting in that chair had already gone somewhere else, leaving only a beautiful shell behind. Raphael! Antonio's voice was too loud, too hearty, desperately overcompensating. He surged forward with his hand extended. My friend! What a glorious day! Raphael shook his hand, noting the tremor in the older man's grip, the way his eyes couldn't quite meet Raphael's. Guilt, fear, and relief warred across Antonio's features in a grotesque dance. Antonio! Raphael's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. You look well. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Antonio Romano looked like a man who'd sold his soul and was waiting for the devil to collect. Come, come, meet your bride properly. Antonio gestured frantically toward Isabella, who still hadn't moved, hadn't even acknowledged Raphael's presence. Up close, Raphael could see the details that distance had hidden, the slight tremor in her hands despite their careful positioning. The way her breathing was too shallow, too controlled, the tension in her jaw that suggested she was grinding her teeth to maintain composure, and something else, a faint bruise on her wrist, barely visible beneath the delicate lace of her sleeve, the kind that came from someone gripping too hard. Isabella, he said her name quietly, testing it. Look at me. For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then, with the mechanical precision of a wind-up doll, she raised her eyes to meet his. Raphael had stared down cartel bosses and corrupt politicians. He'd looked into the eyes of men begging for their lives and felt nothing. But the vacant terror in Isabella Romano's honey-colored eyes hit him like a physical blow. She was looking at him, but she wasn't seeing him. She was seeing a monster, a nightmare made flesh, the end of everything she'd ever hoped for. Isn't she beautiful? Gabriella Romano's voice cracked with artificial brightness. Our Isabella is... Leave us! Raphael's command cut through the air like a blade. Antonio's smile froze. I'm sorry? I said leave us, all of you. Raphael didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Authority rolled off him in waves, and people obeyed. I would speak with my bride alone. The Romano parents exchanged panicked glances. Gabriella's hand fluttered to her throat. But Raphael, it's not proper. Now! They fled. That's what it was. Not a dignified retreat, but a rout. Antonio practically dragged his wife toward the door, while Raphael's own people melted away with the practiced ease of those who knew when their presence was unwanted. In seconds, the vast hall contained only Raphael and Isabella. the silence between them heavy enough to crush stone. Raphael pulled up a chair and sat, deliberately positioning himself at eye level rather than towering over her. It was a calculation, an attempt to appear less threatening, though he suspected his very presence was threat enough. "You can speak freely," he said, keeping his voice low. "Whatever you want to say, whatever questions you have, now is the time." Isabella's lips parted slightly, and for a moment he thought she might actually respond. Then she closed them again, her gaze dropping back to her folded hands. "Are you afraid of me?" The question hung in the air. He hadn't meant to ask it so directly, but something about her silence demanded honesty. Finally she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from disuse. "Does it matter?" The words hit harder than any curse or accusation could have. Does it matter? As if her fear was simply a fact to be acknowledged and dismissed, irrelevant to the transaction they were both trapped in. "It matters to me," Raphael heard himself say, and was surprised to realize he meant it. Isabella's eyes flicked up to his face, searching for deception, for the trap she clearly expected. Finding none, or perhaps finding nothing she could trust, she looked away again. "My father told me what kind of man you are." Her voice was steadier now, but no less hollow. "What you do. What you've done. He told me that if I cooperate, if I fulfill my duties as your wife, my family will be safe. My siblings will be protected. So yes, Mr. DeLuca, I'm afraid of you. But it doesn't matter, does it? We both know why I'm here." Each word was a precision strike, delivered with the calm of someone who'd already accepted their fate. Raphael had heard countless people beg for their lives over the years, had listened to victims and enemies alike try to negotiate for mercy. But he'd never heard anything quite like this quiet, complete surrender that somehow felt more damning than any accusation. "What did he tell you?" Raphael leaned forward slightly. "About what I expect from you?" A faint flush colored her cheeks, the first real color he'd seen in her face. "He told me that I am to be an obedient wife, that I am to manage your household, attend functions at your side, and," she swallowed hard, "and provide you with heirs." The clinical way she said it, "provide you with heirs," as if she were discussing a business contract rather than the most intimate aspects of marriage, made something twist in Raphael's gut. "And if you refuse?" Her eyes met his again, and this time he saw a flash of something beyond fear, a fierce, desperate love that had nothing to do with him. "Then my father's debts remain unpaid. My mother loses her home. My younger sister Lucia, she's only 16, she'll be married off to whoever will take on my father's obligations instead. And my brother Marco, he's studying medicine in Rome. That stops immediately." Raphael sat back, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. This wasn't just an arranged marriage. This was a sacrifice. Isabella Romano hadn't chosen this. She'd been offered up like a lamb to slaughter to save everyone else. "So you see," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength from resignation, "what I want, what I'm afraid of, none of it matters. I'm here because my family needs me to be here. I'll do whatever you require of me because that's the price of their safety. You don't need to pretend to care about my feelings, Mr. DeLuca. Let's just get through this." Raphael stood abruptly, causing Isabella to flinch despite her brave words. He paced to the window, needing distance to process what he was feeling, this unfamiliar sensation of shame that threatened to crack his carefully constructed armor. He'd built an empire on ruthlessness. He'd made decisions that cost lives without losing sleep. He'd done terrible things in the name of power and survival, and he'd never apologized for any of it. But this felt different. This wasn't an enemy combatant or a rival who'd chosen the life. This was a 23-year-old woman. He'd read her file, knew her age, her education, her complete lack of involvement in her father's debts, who'd been traded like property to clean up someone else's mistakes. "The wedding is in 4 hours," Raphael said finally, his back still to her. "The guests are already arriving. The contract has been signed. By sunset, you will be Isabella DeLuca, and everything I own will be legally half yours." He heard her sharp intake of breath at that last part. Clearly, Antonio hadn't mentioned that detail of the prenuptial agreement Raphael had insisted on. Equal partnership in all assets, a stipulation that had made his lawyers nervous, but Raphael had been firm on. If he was taking a wife, she would have real power, real protection. He thought he was being generous. Now it felt like the least he could do. I won't pretend this is a love match, Raphael continued, turning to face her. I won't lie and say I married you for anything other than strategic advantage. But I want you to understand something, Isabella. In my world, I am the law. What I say becomes reality. And I say this, you are under my protection now, not just your family, but you. No one touches you without your permission. No one threatens you. No one hurts you. That includes me. Isabella stared at him with obvious confusion, as if he were speaking a foreign language. I don't understand, she whispered. It's simple. Raphael moved back toward her, but stopped several feet away, maintaining distance. You keep up appearances. You play the role of Mrs. DeLuca in public. You attend events, smile for photographs. Help me maintain the illusion of respectability. In exchange, I keep my word. Your family is protected, their debts erased, your siblings' future secure. But what happens in private, behind closed doors, that's between us. And I'm telling you now, I won't force you into anything. The silence that followed was absolute. Isabella's hands had unclenched from their rigid position, confusion and disbelief warring across her expressive features. Why? The single word was barely audible. Raphael smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Because I may be a monster, Isabella, but I'm not that kind of monster. Before she could respond, the doors burst open and Antonio rushed in, Gabriella close behind. Raphael, the priest has arrived, and the guests are asking... Antonio stopped, taking in the scene. His daughter still seated, Raphael standing several feet away, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. Is everything all right? Raphael straightened his cuffs, his face sliding back into its usual mask of cold control. Everything is perfect, Antonio. Your daughter and I were simply getting acquainted. He turned to Isabella, extending his hand. Shall we prepare for our wedding, cara mia? Isabella looked at his outstretched hand as if it might burn her. Then, with visible effort, she placed her trembling fingers in his palm and stood. Yes, she said, her voice hollow again, the brief flicker of hope he'd seen extinguished. Let's get this over with. The wedding ceremony was everything Raphael's position demanded, and nothing either of them wanted. 200 guests packed the private chapel on the villa grounds, a Baroque monument to old wealth and older sins. Candles flickered in golden sconces, casting dancing shadows across frescoed ceilings where painted angels looked down with what Raphael cynically assumed was judgment. Isabella walked down the aisle on her father's arm, a vision in ivory silk and French lace that had cost Raphael a small fortune. To the assembled guests, she must have looked like a fairy tale. The beautiful bride, the powerful groom, a union of respected families. Only Raphael, watching her approach with those dead eyes and mechanical steps, saw the truth. She looked like a prisoner walking toward her execution, and Antonio Romano looked like the executioner. The ceremony was conducted in rapid Italian by a priest who'd baptized Raphael as a child and had learned not to ask questions about the source of the generous donations to his church. The words washed over Raphael without impact, promises of love and fidelity and eternal devotion that meant nothing in the face of the reality they both understood. When it came time to say I do, Isabella's voice cracked on the second word. Several guests interpreted it as emotion, tears of joy, overwhelming happiness. Raphael knew better. He slid the ring onto her finger, a massive diamond surrounded by sapphires that matched her silk gloves, and felt her hand go rigid beneath his touch. You may kiss the bride. Raphael had kissed countless women. Seductions, manipulations, pleasures taken and discarded without thought. But approaching Isabella for their first kiss as man and wife, he moved with a gentleness that surprised even himself. He cupped her face in his hands, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. But she also didn't lean in, didn't close her eyes, didn't participate beyond frozen acceptance. His lips brushed hers for the briefest moment, chaste and formal, and he tasted salt. She was crying silent tears that left no trace on her perfect makeup. The guests erupted in applause. Marco whistled from the front row. Antonio beamed with relief. And Isabella DeLuca closed her eyes as if she could shut out the reality of what had just happened. The reception was held in the villa's grand ballroom, a space that could have accommodated twice the guest list without feeling crowded. Raphael had spared no expense, Champagne flowed freely, a string quartet played classical arrangements, and the food was prepared by chefs imported from Rome for the occasion. Raphael played his part perfectly. He smiled, accepted congratulations, made toasts that were met with raucous approval. To everyone watching, he was the proud groom, the powerful capo who just secured his empire through strategic marriage. Isabella played her part too, though it clearly cost her. She stood at his side, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm with the lightness of a bird preparing for flight. She smiled when spoken to, responded to well-wishers with gracious words that sounded rehearsed, and flinched only slightly when people touched her. Only Raphael noticed that flinch. Only Raphael saw how she'd gone somewhere else behind her eyes, present in body, but absent in every way that mattered. "She's lovely," Marco said, appearing at Raphael's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "Quiet, though. Is she always this subdued?" Raphael accepted one of the glasses, but didn't drink. "She's adjusting." "Adjusting?" Marco's tone suggested he didn't buy it. "Raphael, I've known you since we were kids stealing bread from market stalls. I've seen you negotiate with men who wanted to kill you, charm women who should have known better, and stare down cops and rivals without breaking a sweat. But I've never seen you look at anyone the way you're looking at her." "And how is that?" "Like you're guilty of something." Raphael's jaw tightened. "Focus on the business, Marco. Make sure our guests from Palermo are properly entertained. And keep the Romano family away from the open bar. Antonio's already had too much to drink." Marco studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Whatever you say, Capo." As Marco melted back into the crowd, Raphael felt Isabella tense beside him. He followed her gaze to where her father was indeed drinking heavily, laughing too loud with some of Raphael's associates, while Gabriella tried desperately to moderate his intake. "He's celebrating," Isabella said quietly. It wasn't a question. He just married his daughter to one of the most powerful men in Sicily. Of course he's celebrating. "He sold me." Still quiet, still toneless. "Let's call it what it is. He sold me to pay his gambling debts, and now he's celebrating his freedom." Raphael had no response to that, because she was absolutely right. "Dance with me." Isabella's head snapped toward him, surprise breaking through her careful composure. "What?" "It's our wedding. People will expect it." He set down his champagne and offered his hand. "Dance with me, Isabella." She looked at his hand as if it were a snake. I'm not very good at... I'll lead, you just have to follow." It wasn't a request, and they both knew it. After a moment's hesitation, Isabella placed her hand in his, and Raphael led her to the center of the ballroom floor. The quartet, well trained to anticipate their employer's desires, transitioned seamlessly into a waltz. Guests moved aside, creating space, their applause and calls of encouragement following the newlyweds. Raphael pulled Isabella into his arms with practiced ease, one hand at her waist, the other clasping her fingers. She was stiff as a board, her body radiating tension and fear. "Breathe," he murmured as they began to move. "You're going to pass out if you keep holding your breath." She released a shaky exhale, and he felt some of the rigidity leave her frame. "Look at me, not at them." Her eyes had been fixed somewhere over his shoulder, but at his command they reluctantly met his. Up close, in the chandelier light, he could see gold flecks in the amber, could see the tears she was fighting not to shed. "I'm not going to hurt you," Raphael said, low enough that only she could hear. "I meant what I said earlier. This doesn't have to be a nightmare." "Then what is it?" Isabella whispered back. "If not a nightmare, what am I supposed to call this?" "Survival. For both of us." They turned across the floor in silence, moving together with surprising grace despite her fear. Raphael was an excellent dancer. His mother had insisted on lessons when he was young, before the world had gone dark and violent, and muscle memory took over where conscious thought faltered. "My mother used to tell me about her wedding day," Isabella said suddenly, her voice distant. "She said it was the happiest day of her life. She wore her grandmother's veil and carried white roses, and my father looked at her like she was the only woman in the world." Her eyes, still locked with Raphael's, were swimming with unshed tears. "I used to imagine my own wedding. Stupid romantic fantasies. I never imagined this." "What did you imagine?" "Love." The word was simple, devastating. "I imagined love." The song ended. Applause erupted around them, but Raphael barely heard it. He was looking at his new wife, this stranger he'd bound himself to, and feeling something crack inside the walls he'd built around whatever passed for his heart.
"I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. Isabella's smile was sad and knowing. "No, you're not. Not really. You got exactly what you wanted. My family's connections, a respectable wife, a strengthened empire. I'm sorry that I'm not better at pretending to be happy about it." Before he could respond, she pulled away, stepping back with a small curtsy that was technically perfect and emotionally empty. "If you'll excuse me, I need some air." She fled before he could stop her, disappearing through the French doors that led to the terrace. Raphael watched her go, aware of the eyes on him, the whispers starting to circulate. Marco appeared again at his side. "Want me to leave her alone?" Raphael's voice was harder than he'd intended. "She needs a moment. Let her have it."
Isabella made it as far as the rose garden before the tears came in earnest. She collapsed onto a stone bench, her expensive dress pooling around her like spilled milk, and finally let herself fall apart. "Great." Shaking sobs tore through her chest, years of carefully controlled emotion breaking free all at once. She tried so hard to be brave. When her father had first told her about his debts, his desperate situation, she'd tried to be understanding. When he'd explained the solution, a marriage to Raphael De Luca, the crime lord whose name made grown men pale, she'd tried to be dutiful. When he'd begged her to save the family, to sacrifice herself for her siblings' futures, she'd tried to be selfless. But all the trying in the world couldn't change the reality. She was trapped, married to a man she didn't know, bound to a life she'd never wanted, all to pay for her father's mistakes. "Isabella?" She jerked upright, swiping at her tears, expecting Raphael, but it was her mother who stood at the garden entrance, wringing her handkerchief with anxious hands.
"Mama,"
Isabella's voice was raw.
"I thought you were. I saw you leave."
Gabriella moved closer, her own face streaked with tears.
"Oh, my darling girl, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry."
"Then why didn't you stop it?" The question burst out before Isabella could stop it, anger and hurt and betrayal all tangled together.
You knew. You knew what Papa was asking of me, and you didn't say no."
Gabriella flinched as if struck.
"What choice did I have? Your father. You could have said no."
Isabella stood, her hands clenched into fists.
"You could have found another way, sold the house, moved somewhere smaller, anything but this. And what would happen to Lucia, to little Marco?" Gabriella's voice rose to match her daughter's. "Without this marriage, without De Luca's protection, your father's creditors would have come for everything. Lucia would have been married off to some old man willing to take on debts, and Marco's education would have ended. Is that what you wanted?" "I wanted someone to fight for me."
The words tore out of Isabella's throat. "I wanted someone to say that I mattered, that my life was worth more than a business transaction. But instead, Papa sold me like I was livestock, and you stood by and let it happen." The silence that followed was broken only by Isabella's ragged breathing and her mother's quiet sobs.
"You're right,"
Gabriella finally whispered. "You're absolutely right, and I will never forgive myself for it. But Isabella, please understand, Raphael De Luca is not a man to cross. If we had refused, if we had tried to run or find another solution, he would have—"
"He would have what?"
Isabella laughed bitterly.
"Killed us. Maybe that would have been kinder."
"Don't say that." Gabriella gripped her daughter's shoulders.
"Don't ever say that. You're alive. You're safe. I'm terrified."
Isabella's composure shattered completely. "I'm married to a stranger who kills people, who runs criminal operations, who could destroy me with a word if I displease him. How is that safe?"
"He seemed kind during the ceremony.
The way he looked at you. He looks at me like I'm a possession he hasn't decided what to do with yet." Isabella pulled away from her mother's touch. "Don't romanticize this, Mama. Don't make it into something it's not." Gabriella's face crumpled.
"What do you want me to say? That I'm a terrible mother? That I failed you?"
"I know all of that, Isabella. I know, and I have to live with it. But you're my daughter, and even though I can't change what's happened, I can tell you this. Survive. Do whatever you have to do to survive, and find moments of happiness where you can. That's all any of us can do." Isabella wanted to rage, to scream, to reject her mother's words entirely,
but exhaustion was creeping in, pulling her under like a tide. "I need to go back inside," she said dully. "People will notice I'm gone." "Isabella, please, Mama, just please leave me alone."
Gabriella hesitated, then nodded and retreated, leaving Isabella alone in the darkening garden. Isabella sank back onto the bench and stared up at the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. Somewhere in the villa behind her, music still played, guests still celebrated, and her new husband likely noticed her continued absence. She thought about running, just standing up and walking away, disappearing into the night and never looking back. But even as the fantasy formed, reality crushed it. Where would she go? How would she survive? And what would happen to Lucia and Marco if she broke the contract? No, she was trapped, as surely as if Raphael had locked her in a cell. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her tense, but she didn't turn around. If it was Raphael coming to collect his wayward bride, so be it. She was too tired to keep up the act anyway. "I brought you water." It was Marco, Raphael's second in command, not her brother. He approached cautiously, as if she were a spooked animal, and held out a crystal glass. Isabella accepted it mechanically, her manners too ingrained to refuse. "The boss wanted to come himself," Marco said, sitting on the bench beside her with careful distance between them. "But I convinced him that maybe you needed a break from DeLuca's for a minute." Despite everything, Isabella felt a surprised laugh bubble up.
"That was kind of you." "I have my moments." Marco studied her with eyes that had seen too much. "You're scared of him." It wasn't a question, but Isabella answered anyway. "Wouldn't you be?" "Honestly, yeah, probably. Raphael's reputation isn't exactly warm and fuzzy." Marco leaned back, looking up at the same stars Isabella had been contemplating. "But I've known him a long time, and I can tell you something. He's not what people think he is. He's a criminal. A killer. Yes to both. But he's also loyal to the people under his protection, fair in his judgments, and he keeps his word. If Raphael told you something, you can believe it." Isabella thought about Raphael's promise earlier, that he wouldn't force her, that she was under his protection. She wanted to believe it, but trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Marco shrugged. "Because you looked like you needed to hear it, and because Raphael's been different since he met you. Well, since today, anyway. I've never seen him second-guess himself before, but with you, he's careful. That means something. It means he's good at playing roles. Maybe. Or maybe it means he's capable of being more than what people expect." Marco stood, brushing off his expensive suit. "Anyway, the reception's winding down. Raphael's making excuses for you. Said you have a headache from all the excitement. When you're ready to come back in, he'll be waiting." He left before Isabella could respond, his footsteps fading back toward the villa's lights and music. Isabella sat alone in the dark garden, the untouched water glass cold in her hands, and tried to decide what kind of man she'd married. A monster who could fake kindness? Or something more complicated, more human? She wasn't sure which possibility frightened her more. By the time Isabella returned to the reception, only the closest family and associates remained. The casual guests had departed, leaving behind the people who truly mattered in Raphael's world. The enforcers, the advisors, the family members who'd chosen or been born into this life. Raphael stood near the bar in conversation with several older men, but his eyes found Isabella the moment she entered. He excused himself immediately, crossing the room to her side. "Better?" he asked quietly. Isabella nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. We'll make our exit soon. It's been a long day." The word sent a spike of fear through her chest. Make our exit. Leave the safety of the crowd. Be alone together. On their wedding night. Raphael must have seen something in her face because his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Isabella." "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired." "Of course." He offered his arm in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "Come. Let's say our goodbyes." The next half hour passed in a blur of handshakes and air kisses, well wishes and knowing looks. Isabella smiled until her face hurt, accepted congratulations she didn't feel, and tried not to think about what came next. Finally, mercifully, they were in Raphael's car, a sleek black Mercedes with bulletproof windows
and a driver who knew better than to make small talk. The villa disappeared behind them as they wound through dark Sicilian roads, heading toward—
Where? Where are we going? Isabella asked, breaking the heavy silence. Another property I own, about 20 minutes from here. More private. Raphael was looking out his window, his profile sharp in the passing streetlights. I thought you'd prefer not to spend our wedding night at the villa with all my associates nearby. He was probably right, but the consideration still surprised her. Everything about Raphael De Luca surprised her. The moments of unexpected gentleness, the careful distance he maintained, the way he'd kept his promises so far. It would be easier if he were simply a monster. Monsters were predictable. The property turned out to be a converted farmhouse on a hillside overlooking the Mediterranean. Ancient stone walls softened by climbing roses, windows that glowed warm in the darkness. A place that felt more like a home than the imposing villa they'd left behind. It belonged to my grandmother, Raphael explained as the car stopped. I spent summers here as a child. It's quieter than the villa. The driver opened Isabella's door and she stepped out into the cool night air, wrapping her arms around herself. The sound of the sea was a distant whisper, mixing with the chirp of crickets. Raphael led her inside without touching her, even when the uneven stone steps would have justified offering his hand. The interior was exactly as the exterior promised. Rustic elegance, comfortable furniture, books lining built-in shelves, a fireplace that someone had already lit. "The bedroom is upstairs," Raphael said, his voice carefully neutral. "Your things have been brought over. There's a bathroom attached and—" He stopped, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that seemed unconscious. "Isabella, I need you to understand something." She turned to face him, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What I said earlier about not forcing you, I meant it. The bedroom is yours tonight. I'll take the guest room down the hall." Isabella stared at him. "But the marriage is supposed to be— People will expect—" "I don't care what people expect." Raphael's voice was firm. "I care that you're terrified, and I won't add to that terror. Not tonight. Not until you're ready, if you ever are." "I don't understand." The words came out as a whisper. "Why would you— Men like you don't— Men like me?" There was something bitter in his smile. "What kind of man do you think I am, Isabella?" "The kind who takes what he wants." "Yes." He didn't deny it. "In business, in war, in building my empire, I take what I want without apology."
"But you're not business or territory to conquer. You're—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "You're my wife. That means something, even in a marriage like ours." Isabella felt tears threatening again. "I don't know what to do with kindness from you. It would be easier if you were cruel. At least then I'd know where I stand." Raphael moved closer, and she tensed instinctively. He stopped immediately, maintaining distance. "You stand under my protection," he said quietly. "You stand as Isabella De Luca, with all the power and safety that name provides. And you stand as a woman who deserves basic human decency, regardless of how she ended up here. Can you accept that?" Isabella didn't know how to answer. Everything she'd been told about Raphael De Luca, everything she'd prepared herself for, contradicted the man standing before her. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I don't know what to believe." "Then don't believe anything yet. Just rest. Tomorrow we can talk about what comes next. But tonight, you're safe. I promise you that." He moved toward the stairs, clearly intending to leave her alone, but something made Isabella call out. "Raphael?" He paused, turning back. "Thank you for not—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't give voice to the fear that had been consuming her all day. Understanding flickered across his face. "You don't need to thank me for basic humanity, Isabella." "In my experience today, basic humanity is in short supply." Something painful crossed Raphael's expression. "Your father is a coward and a fool. You deserve better than to be his solution. But you benefited from his cowardice and foolishness. You got exactly what you wanted." "Did I?" Raphael's laugh was hollow. "I wanted a political alliance, a strategic partnership, a wife who understood the arrangement. What I got was a terrified girl forced into marriage to save her family. Trust me, Isabella, this isn't what I wanted." Before she could respond, he headed up the stairs, calling back without turning around. "The kitchen is stocked if you're hungry. There's wine in the cellar.
The house is secure. You're free to move around as you please. Just try to get some rest." Isabella stood in the quiet living room long after his footsteps faded, trying to process everything. Her husband, that word still felt surreal, had just given her freedom for the night, had promised not to touch her, not to force her into the intimacy she'd been dreading. It should have brought relief. And it did, in a way. But it also brought confusion, uncertainty, and a dangerous seed of something that might have been hope. Isabella climbed the stairs slowly, finding the master bedroom exactly as Raphael had described. Her suitcases sat unopened on a bench at the foot of a massive four-poster bed. The room was beautiful, all exposed beams and soft linens, windows overlooking the dark sea. A prison, but a beautiful one. She changed out of her wedding dress mechanically, hanging the expensive silk in the closet with care born of habit rather than affection. She'd never wear it again, never want to remember this day. In simple cotton pajamas, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her reflection in the antique mirror across the room. Isabella De Luca looked back at her, a stranger wearing her face, married to a man she didn't know, trapped in a life she'd never chosen. The girl she'd been this morning, Isabella Romano, with dreams of love and freedom and a future she could choose, was gone. That girl had died in a Baroque chapel in front of 200 witnesses, and this new woman had been born in her place. Isabella didn't know who this new woman was yet, didn't know if she was strong enough to survive what lay ahead. But as she finally crawled between the soft sheets and turned off the lamp, alone in the darkness, she made herself a promise. She would survive. She would find a way to live with the choices that had been made for her. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to reclaim some small piece of herself in the process. In the guest room down the hall, Raphael De Luca lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the hell he'd just done. He'd made promises he wasn't sure he could keep, offered kindness he wasn't sure he possessed, and looked into his new wife's eyes and felt something he'd spent years carefully killing: guilt. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction, an alliance, a means to an end. But nothing about Isabella Romano, no, Isabella De Luca now, was simple. And Raphael suspected that his carefully ordered world was about to become far more complicated than he'd ever anticipated. The thought should have worried him. Instead, alone in the dark, he found himself almost looking forward to the chaos. Morning light filtered through the gauze curtains, painting golden stripes across unfamiliar walls. Isabella woke disoriented, her heart racing before memory crashed back. The wedding, the reception, Raphael's unexpected mercy. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from tension she'd carried even in sleep, and realized with dull surprise that she'd actually slept at all. The house was silent. No sounds of movement, no indication that Raphael was awake or even present. Isabella moved to the window and looked out over the Mediterranean, the sea a brilliant blue that seemed obscene in its beauty. How could the world look so peaceful when her life had been turned inside out? A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Isabella!" Raphael's voice was cautious, respectful of the boundary the closed door represented. "I've made coffee. Come down when you're ready." She heard his footsteps retreat down the stairs before she could respond. The consideration, giving her space, not pushing, should have comforted her. Instead, it left her unbalanced, uncertain how to navigate this strange dynamic. Isabella dressed in simple clothes from her suitcase, taking longer than necessary because descending those stairs meant facing whatever came next. Eventually, she couldn't delay any longer. Raphael sat at a rustic wooden table in the kitchen, a laptop open in front of him, his attention focused on the screen with the intensity of a predator tracking prey. He'd changed from his wedding suit into dark jeans and a black shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms marked with scars she suspected had violent origins. Without the formal attire, he looked younger, more human, though no less dangerous. He glanced up when she entered, and for a moment something flickered in his dark eyes. Concern, maybe, or assessment. Then it was gone, replaced by careful neutrality. "Coffee's fresh," he said, gesturing to an expensive-looking machine on the counter. "There's food in the refrigerator if you're hungry. Help yourself to anything." Isabella poured coffee she didn't want, just to have something to do with her hands. The kitchen was beautiful in that effortless way. Expensive things often were. Copper pots hanging from iron hooks, marble countertops,
Herbs growing in terracotta pots on the windowsill. A grandmother's farmhouse renovated with unlimited funds. Did you sleep? Raphael asked, closing his laptop. Some. Isabella remained standing, the island counter a barrier between them. You? Not much. I rarely do. He studied her with those unsettling eyes. We need to talk about expectations, about how this is going to work. Isabella's hands tightened around her mug. I thought we established that last night. I play the dutiful wife in public, and in private we maintain separate lives. It's more complicated than that. Raphael stood and Isabella fought the instinct to step back. He noticed, of course he noticed, and stopped moving, leaning against the counter instead. People in my world will be watching us, looking for weakness. If they sense our marriage is a sham, it undermines everything, so we need to establish some ground rules. Rules? Isabella's laugh was bitter. How fitting. Isabella, no, please, continue. Tell me how to be a proper mafia wife. I'm sure there's a handbook. Raphael's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. You can hate me all you want in private, but in public, we need to present a united front. That means attending events together, showing affection when necessary, convincing people this marriage is real. Showing affection. The words tasted like ash. You mean pretending? Yes, pretending. He met her gaze directly. Can you do that? Isabella thought about Lucia, about Marco, about the family depending on her to hold up her end of this bargain. I can pretend. I've been pretending since my father first told me what he'd done. What's a little more performance? Something painful crossed Raphael's face, but he pushed forward. You'll need to learn about my business operations, not the details, but enough to be conversant at dinner parties. You'll manage household staff at the villa, coordinate social events, serve as my hostess. In exchange, you'll have access to all financial accounts. Your family's debts are cleared as of this morning. Your sister's education is secured, your brother's medical school fully funded. Each item on his list was another chain, another obligation. Isabella set down her coffee mug carefully, afraid if she held it any longer, she might throw it. Anything else? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Yes. Raphael moved closer, and this time Isabella did step back. He stopped immediately. I need you to understand that while we're married, you're under my protection. That means no one touches you, threatens you, or disrespects you. But it also means you can't just disappear. If you want to go somewhere, you coordinate with Marco or one of my other men. It's not about controlling you. It's about keeping you safe. Safe? Isabella laughed again, the sound cracking. I'm married to a criminal and you want me to feel safe? I'm trying to give you as much freedom as possible within impossible circumstances. Freedom? The word exploded out of her. You want to talk about freedom? I'm trapped in a marriage I didn't choose, in a life I never wanted, playing a role to save my family from debts I didn't create. There is no freedom here, Raphael. There's only varying degrees of captivity. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Raphael's expression had shuttered completely, impossible to read. You're right, he said finally. This is captivity, for both of us. Isabella blinked. What? You think I wanted this? Raphael's voice was low, controlled, but something sharp edged beneath the surface. I didn't marry for love or companionship. I married for strategy, for power, for consolidation of territory. But now I'm tied to someone who looks at me like I'm her executioner, and I have to live with knowing I participated in your father's cowardice. So yes, Isabella, we're both trapped. The only question is whether we make this bearable or let it destroy us. Isabella stared at him, trying to reconcile this admission with everything she thought she knew. If you regret it so much, why not just annul the marriage? Tear up the contract? Because the alternative is worse. Raphael's expression was grim. Your father's creditors aren't patient men. Without my protection, they'll come for your family. Lucia will be married off to someone who makes me look like a saint. Marco will lose everything. Your mother will lose her home. Is that what you want? Of course not, Isabella's voice rose. But don't pretend you're doing this out of kindness. You got what you needed from this arrangement. I got a strategic alliance, yes, but I also got a wife who can barely stand to be in the same room with me, and I'm discovering that's considerably less satisfying than I anticipated. He ran a hand through his hair,
frustration cracking his composure. Look, I'm not asking you to love me or even like me. I'm asking you to work with me to make this situation tolerable. Can you do that? Isabella wanted to say no, wanted to rage and refuse and reject everything he represented. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had agreed to this marriage in the first place, whispered that cooperation might be her only path to survival. What exactly does working with you look like? She asked carefully. It looks like honest communication. If something I do frightens you, tell me. If you need space, ask for it. If there are hard boundaries you need me to respect, establish them now. Raphael's voice softened slightly. I know you don't trust me, and I've given you no reason to, but I'm asking you to try. Isabella studied him, this complicated, contradictory man who could promise violence in one breath and gentleness in the next. Every instinct screamed not to believe him, not to let her guard down. But those same instincts had failed her so completely already. Her father was supposed to protect her, and instead he'd sold her. What did she really have to lose by testing Raphael's word? I need time alone, she said finally. Every day. Time where I'm not performing or pretending or managing your household. Just time to be myself. Done. Anything else? I want to visit my family regularly, not just on holidays or special occasions. Raphael nodded, with security, but yes. And I want... Isabella hesitated, then pushed forward. I want my own space, a room that's just mine, where I can go when everything becomes too much. The bedroom upstairs is yours. I meant what I said last night. I won't invade that space without permission. What about you? The question surprised even Isabella. What do you need from me? Raphael seemed equally surprised by the question. He considered for a long moment before answering. Discretion. Whatever you see or hear about my business, it stays between us. And in public, I need you to convince people we're a real couple. Beyond that? He shrugged. I'm still figuring it out. They stood in the warm kitchen, morning light streaming through windows, two strangers bound by contracts and circumstances trying to negotiate a bearable existence. This is insane, Isabella said quietly. All of it. Completely. Raphael's smile was brief, humorless. Welcome to my world. The sound of a car on the gravel drive broke the moment. Raphael's entire demeanor shifted instantly, the vulnerability vanishing, replaced by cold authority. He moved to the window with predatory grace. Marco, he said, relaxing slightly. I asked him to bring some things from the villa. Isabella watched through the window as Marco emerged from a black SUV, carrying several bags. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes suggesting a late-night cleaning up after the reception. Raphael opened the door before Marco could knock. Everything secure? Everyone's gone. The villa's locked down. Marco's eyes flicked to Isabella, a flash of surprise that she was actually downstairs, actually talking to Raphael. Morning, Mrs. DeLuca. The name sent ice through Isabella's veins. Mrs. DeLuca. Not a temporary identity, but her reality now. Isabella is fine, she managed. Marco set down the bags, groceries, Isabella realized, along with what looked like personal items. Boss, we need to talk. There's been a development. Raphael's expression darkened. What kind of development? The Calabrese family. They're questioning the marriage, suggesting it's not legitimate. Rumors are spreading that it's purely strategic, no real foundation. Let them talk. Raphael's voice was dismissive, but tension had entered his shoulders. It's not just talk. They're using it to challenge your authority, saying you're not as untouchable as you claim if you had to buy a wife. Marco glanced apologetically at Isabella. Their words, not mine. Isabella watched Raphael's face transform. The careful gentleness he'd shown her evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating, the crime lord reasserting dominance. Then we make them believers, Raphael said softly, and the quiet promise of violence in his tone made Isabella's blood run cold. Arrange a dinner party for next weekend. Invite the Calabrese family and anyone else questioning our union. They want to see a legitimate marriage? We'll give them a performance they can't deny. Raphael, Isabella started, but he cut her off with a look. This is exactly what I meant about presenting a united front. Are you up for it? Isabella thought about the alternative. Raphael handling the Calabrese family the way he likely handled all challenges to his authority, with violence and terror. "Yes," she said, though her voice shook. "I can do it." "Good." Raphael turned back to Marco. "Anything else?"
Antonio Romano called 3 times, wants to know when he can visit his daughter. Raphael's expression turned contemptuous. "Tell him Isabella will contact him when she's ready. Until then, he can enjoy his debt-free existence and leave us alone." Marco nodded and left, leaving Raphael and Isabella alone again. The dynamic had shifted. Whatever tentative understanding they'd been building cracked under the weight of reality. Raphael was pacing now, that predatory energy unleashed, and Isabella recognized the truth she'd been trying to ignore. This man was dangerous, not just theoretically, not just in reputation, but fundamentally. Whatever gentleness he'd shown her was a choice he could revoke at any moment. "I should go make some calls," Raphael said, already moving toward his laptop. "Feel free to explore the property. Just don't go beyond the stone wall. There's a security perimeter I'd rather you didn't cross." And just like that, he dismissed her, his attention already elsewhere. Isabella stood in the kitchen feeling invisible, irrelevant, a prop in his production. She spent the rest of the morning exploring the farmhouse like a prisoner learning the boundaries of her cell. The property was beautiful. She couldn't deny that. Gardens bursting with roses and lavender, olive trees casting dappled shade, the distant sound of the sea a constant whisper. But beauty didn't make it less of a cage. In the afternoon, Isabella found a small library tucked into a corner of the house. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books in Italian, English, and what looked like French. She pulled down a worn copy of poetry, Dante, fitting given her current circle of hell, and settled into a window seat. She'd read maybe 3 pages when Raphael appeared in the doorway. "I have to go to Palermo," he said without preamble. "Business that can't wait. I'll be back late tonight." "Okay." Isabella didn't look up from her book. "Marco will be here if you need anything. And Isabella?" He waited until she met his eyes. "Don't try to leave, for your own safety." She wanted to throw the book at him. Instead, she smiled coldly. "Where would I go?" He studied her for a long moment, then left without another word. Isabella listened to his car disappear down the drive and felt a complicated mix of relief and abandonment. Marco appeared an hour later with lunch, fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and wine. "You don't have to babysit me," Isabella said as he set down the tray. "I'm not babysitting. I'm making sure you eat." Marco settled into a chair across from her. "Raphael said you barely touch breakfast." "Raphael talks about me." "You're his wife. Of course he talks about you." Marco poured wine into 2 glasses, offering one to Isabella. "He's worried." "Worried I'll run? Worried I'll embarrass him? Worried you'll hurt yourself." Marco's directness was jarring. He's seen that look before. The one you wear like armor. People who've given up hope. Isabella's hands tightened around her wine glass. "I haven't given up hope. I've just adjusted my expectations to match reality." "That's a fancy way of saying the same thing." Marco took a long drink. "Look, I know this situation is awful for you. I get it. But Raphael's trying, more than I've ever seen him try with anyone. That has to count for something." "Why?" Isabella finally looked at him directly. "Why does he care? I'm just a strategic acquisition." Marco laughed, the sound genuine but sad. "You really don't see it, do you? The way he looks at you when you're not watching. The way he second-guesses every decision because he's afraid of scaring you more. I've known Raphael since we were kids stealing bread to survive, and I've never seen him care about anyone's feelings like this." "Then he's a good actor. Or maybe you're so busy protecting yourself that you can't see when someone's actually trying to reach you." Marco stood, leaving the lunch tray. "Eat something, Isabella, and maybe consider that you're not the only one struggling with this situation." He left before she could respond, and Isabella sat alone with bread she didn't want and thought she couldn't escape. The afternoon bled into evening. Isabella ate mechanically, returned to her book without absorbing the words, and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of fire before surrendering to darkness. She kept expecting Raphael to return, tensing at every distant sound, but the house remained quiet. Finally, as midnight approached, Isabella gave up and went upstairs. She'd just changed into pajamas when she heard a car on the gravel. Then voices, raised, angry. She moved to the window and saw Raphael emerging from his Mercedes, blood on his shirt, his face carved from stone. Marco was there, along with two other men she didn't recognize, all of them arguing in rapid Italian too fast for her limited understanding to follow. Raphael looked up suddenly, his eyes finding her window with unerring accuracy. Even from this distance, she could see the violence in his expression, the barely contained rage. She stepped back from the window, heart hammering. Whatever business had taken him to Palermo had gone badly, and the man returning to this house was not the one who'd offered her mercy last night. This was the Raphael De Luca of reputation, the crime lord, the killer, the man who commanded through fear. Isabella locked her bedroom door. Then, feeling foolish but unable to help herself, she pushed a chair under the handle. She climbed into bed fully dressed and lay rigid in the darkness, listening to sounds from below. Footsteps on the stairs, the creak of floorboards in the hallway. A pause outside her door that seemed to last forever. Then Raphael's voice, quiet enough that she almost missed it. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Sleep well, Isabella." His footsteps retreated. A door closed down the hall. The house fell silent again. Isabella didn't sleep. She lay awake in the darkness, every muscle tense, waiting for something she couldn't name. But Raphael never returned to her door, never tested the lock, never demanded entry to what he'd promised was her space. When dawn finally came, Isabella was exhausted and more confused than ever. Because somehow, the fact that Raphael had kept his word, even when covered in someone else's blood, was more terrifying than if he'd broken it. It meant he had control, discipline, the ability to compartmentalize violence and gentleness. It meant he was exactly as dangerous as everyone said, but in ways Isabella was only beginning to understand. She found him in the kitchen again, showered and changed, the blood gone but dark circles under his eyes betraying his sleepless night. Coffee was already brewing, and he was staring out at the sea with an expression she couldn't read. "Good morning," he said without turning around. Isabella poured coffee, her hands shaking slightly. "Are you hurt?" The question seemed to surprise him. He turned, studying her. "The blood wasn't mine." "That's not what I asked." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor. "No, I'm not hurt. But that's kind of you to ask." They stood in silence, the weight of unspoken questions heavy between them. "What happened in Palermo?" Isabella asked finally. "Nothing you need to worry about. If we're supposed to be honest with each other, that's a terrible start." Raphael's smile was grim. "There are things in my world you're better off not knowing, Isabella. Trust me on that. Stop protecting me from information and then expecting me to play my part convincingly." Isabella's voice was sharp. "I can't be a believable wife if I'm kept in the dark about everything." Raphael considered this, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "Fair point. The Calabrese family didn't just question our marriage. They made moves against one of my operations, thinking the wedding was a distraction they could exploit. I had to correct that misunderstanding." "Correct." The euphemism was almost funny. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Would you prefer the details? Because I can give them to you, but I doubt you'll sleep any better for knowing." Isabella thought about the blood on his shirt, the violence in his eyes. "No, I don't need details. I just need to know, are we in danger? Is my family?" "No, the message was received. We're safe." Raphael moved closer, and for once Isabella didn't retreat. "This is why I need the dinner party to work. I need to show strength, unity, a marriage solid enough that no one dares challenge it. Can you help me do that?" Isabella looked at this man who'd killed. She had no illusions about what correcting misunderstandings meant, and yet had kept every promise he'd made to her. This man who inspired terror across Sicily, but handled her like fragile glass. "Teach me," she said. "What?" "If I'm going to convince people we're a real couple, I need to know more about you, not just the public persona, but the person. So teach me. Tell me things a real wife would know." Raphael studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for her to do the same. "What do you want to know?" Isabella sat, cradling her coffee mug. "Start with something simple. What's your favorite meal?" He blinked, clearly not expecting such a mundane question. "My grandmother's arancini. She used to make them every Sunday when I was a child. Does she still cook for you? She died when I was 14. Raphael's voice was carefully neutral. Cancer. My grandfather followed 6 months later. They said it was a heart attack, but I think it was grief. Isabella felt something soften in her chest, sympathy bleeding through despite her best efforts to maintain distance. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, but the pain in his eyes suggested otherwise. My turn. What did you want to be when you were a child? A teacher. Isabella smiled despite herself, remembering. I loved school, loved learning. I wanted to help children discover that same love. What stopped you? Life. Family obligations, my father's expectations. She met his gaze. And now this. Raphael nodded slowly. If things were different, if you weren't married to me, what would you be doing right now? Probably finishing my degree, maybe volunteering at Lucia's school, reading in coffee shops and arguing with Marco about his terrible taste in music. Isabella's voice caught. Living a completely ordinary, wonderfully boring life. I took that from you. You participated in taking it. My father started the process. They fell silent again, but this time it felt less hostile, more contemplative. Outside, the Mediterranean sparkled under morning sun, oblivious to the complicated negotiations happening in the kitchen. Tell me about Marco, Isabella said. You're Marco, not my brother. How did you meet? Street fight when we were 13. 3 older boys cornered me in an alley, demanding money I didn't have. Marco came out of nowhere with a metal pipe and terrible battle strategy. Raphael's smile was genuine this time, warm with memory. We barely won, but we won together. Been watching each other's backs ever since. He's loyal to you. Loyalty is the only currency that matters in my world. Raphael's expression hardened slightly. Everything else, money, power, respect, can be bought or taken. But loyalty? That's earned through blood and time. Is that what you want from me, loyalty? I want you to survive this, Isabella. I want you to find whatever happiness is possible in an impossible situation. If loyalty develops along the way, that's a bonus. He stood, moving to the window. The dinner party is Saturday. That gives us 5 days to become convincing as a couple. Are you willing to try? Isabella joined him at the window, maintaining careful distance. What does trying look like? It looks like spending time together, learning to be comfortable in each other's presence, maybe even finding common ground. Raphael turned to face her. I know I'm asking a lot, but I'm asking, not demanding. That has to count for something. It does, Isabella admitted quietly. I just don't know if it's enough. Then let's find out together. The next 5 days were strange, surreal, like living in a carefully constructed play. Raphael canceled business trips and cleared his schedule. They ate meals together, took walks through the gardens, sat in companionable silence in the library. He taught her about his world, not the violence, but the politics, the families, the complex web of alliances and grudges that govern Sicily's underworld. Isabella taught him about herself in return, though she rationed the information carefully, sharing only what felt safe. Her childhood, her siblings, her mother's garden that she'd helped maintain. Slowly, impossibly, they began to relax around each other. Raphael stopped moving so carefully, though he never touched her without permission. Isabella stopped flinching at sudden movements, stopped watching him like he might attack at any moment. On Thursday afternoon, they were in the kitchen preparing dinner together, Raphael's insistence that they needed to appear domestic, when Isabella accidentally knocked over a bottle of wine. It shattered on the marble floor, red liquid spreading like blood. She froze, expecting anger. Her father would have exploded at such carelessness, would have made her feel stupid and worthless for hours. But Raphael just grabbed a towel and knelt to clean it up. Careful, he said, seeing her move toward the mess. There's glass. Let me handle it. Isabella stared at him, this man who commanded armies and ordered executions, on his knees cleaning up her mess without a word of complaint. I'm sorry, she whispered. It's wine, Isabella, not the end of the world. He looked up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You don't have to apologize for accidents. My father... She stopped, not wanting to explain, but Raphael understood anyway. His jaw tightened. I'm not your father, and you're not a child to be scolded for mistakes. The simple statement shouldn't have meant so much. But standing in that kitchen, watching Raphael carefully collect glass shards and wipe up wine, Isabella felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. Thank you, she said. Raphael stood disposing of the glass and soiled towels. You keep thanking me for basic decency. That says more about what you've experienced than anything else. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just learning that not all men are like my father. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Isabella didn't look away immediately. She let herself actually see him, the intelligence in his dark eyes, the careful control he maintained, the unexpected gentleness in his handling of her. We should finish dinner, Raphael said finally, his voice slightly rough. We're having guests tomorrow for a trial run before the main event. Guests? Alarm spiked through Isabella. Marco and his girlfriend, Sophia. Just friendly faces to practice with. I thought it might help. Isabella nodded, grateful for his consideration, even as anxiety twisted her stomach. Tomorrow would be the first time she performed as Raphael's wife for an audience, even a small one. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth. Isabella dressed carefully in a simple but elegant dress Raphael had somehow procured in her exact size. She tried not to think about how he'd managed that. She applied makeup with shaking hands, trying to transform herself into Mrs. DeLuca, wife of a crime lord. The woman in the mirror looked the part, at least. Poised, elegant, the perfect accessory for a man like Raphael. She descended the stairs to find Raphael in the living room, similarly dressed up, and for a moment they just looked at each other. You look beautiful, he said quietly. Thank you. You look... Isabella hesitated, then committed to honesty. Terrifying and handsome in equal measure. Raphael's laugh was surprised and genuine. I'll take that as a compliment. The sound of a car on gravel announced Marco and Sophia's arrival. Raphael moved to stand beside Isabella, close enough that she could feel his body heat, and spoke low enough that only she could hear. Just follow my lead. If you get uncomfortable, touch your earring. I'll create a distraction so you can step away. The consideration in that simple escape plan steadied Isabella's nerves. She nodded, and together they moved to greet their guests. Sophia turned out to be a revelation, bright, funny, completely unintimidated by Raphael's reputation. She embraced Isabella like an old friend. Finally, another woman in this testosterone-soaked world. You have no idea how happy I am to meet you. Dinner was easier than Isabella expected. Sophia carried much of the conversation, telling outrageous stories about Marco's failed attempts at romance. Raphael participated with dry humor, his hand occasionally finding Isabella's under the table in a gesture that looked casual but felt deliberate, practicing the physical comfort they'd need to display tomorrow. Isabella found herself almost relaxing, almost forgetting this was performance rather than reality. When Raphael's thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending unexpected warmth up her arm, she didn't pull away. So how did you two meet? Sophia asked, wine making her bold. The official story is so boring. Arranged marriage, family alliance, blah blah. But what was it really like? Isabella and Raphael exchanged glances, a moment of silent communication. It was complicated, Isabella said carefully. Not a fairy tale beginning. The best love stories never are, Sophia declared. Look at Marco and me. We met when I tried to rob him. Marco choked on his wine. Sophia! What? It's true. I thought he was just some rich guy. Didn't know he worked for Raphael. Best failed robbery of my life. Sophia grinned. Now here we are, 3 years later, and I'm meeting his boss's new wife at a dinner party. Life's weird. The easy confession loosened something in Isabella's chest. Maybe messy beginnings could lead somewhere better. Maybe complicated didn't have to mean doomed. The evening wound down with coffee and conversation that felt almost natural. When Marco and Sophia finally left, Isabella stood with Raphael on the front steps, waving goodbye like a normal couple might. That went well, Raphael said once they were alone. Sophia's wonderful. How did you... Isabella stopped, realizing the answer. You chose her specifically, knowing she'd put me at ease. I chose them because they're genuine friends who won't judge or gossip. But yes, I thought Sophia's energy might help. Raphael turned to face her. You did beautifully tonight. If you can manage even half that comfort level tomorrow, we'll be fine. Tomorrow, there will be people who want to see us fail. Yes, but they'll also see us refuse to give them that satisfaction. Raphael's hand came up, hesitating near her face, asking permission. Isabella nodded almost imperceptibly, and his fingers brushed her cheek, a touch so gentle it made her breath catch. We're going to survive this, Isabella. Both of us. Together. Standing in the darkness with his hand warm against her skin, Isabella found herself almost believing him. Morning light filtered through the curtains like an unwelcome guest, pulling Isabella from a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams she couldn't quite remember. For a single blissful moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back with the weight of the unfamiliar room, the strange bed, and the gold band circling her finger. She was married to Rafael De Luca. And somehow, impossibly, she'd survived the night untouched. Isabella sat up slowly, her body aching from tension she'd carried even in sleep. The house was quiet, almost eerily so, and she wondered if Rafael was still here or if he'd left for whatever dark business occupied his days. Part of her hoped he was gone. It would be easier not to face him yet. But another part, smaller and more confused, wondered what it meant that he'd kept his promise. A soft knock at the door made her freeze. Isabella? Raphael's voice was muffled through the heavy wood. I'm leaving breakfast outside your door. Take your time. She heard his footsteps retreat before she could respond, and the gesture, this careful avoidance of entering her space without permission, left her oddly unsettled. She'd spent the entire previous day bracing for violence, for demands, for the assertion of rights he legally possessed. This continued gentleness felt like waiting for a storm that never broke. After a long shower that did little to wash away her confusion, Isabella emerged to find a tray waiting exactly as promised. Fresh pastries, fruit, coffee in a delicate porcelain cup, and a single white rose in a slim vase. No note, no demands, just breakfast and a flower. She carried the tray back inside and ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind spinning through possibilities and implications. What did Raphael want from her? What was his game? Men like him didn't offer kindness without expecting something in return. When she finally gathered the courage to leave the bedroom, dressed in simple linen pants and a silk blouse that felt like armor, she found Raphael on the terrace overlooking the sea. He was dressed casually, dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he was on the phone, speaking rapid Italian in a tone that made her blood run cold. I don't care what excuse he gives you, Marco. He had 48 hours to deliver, and he failed. Make an example. A pause. No, not killed. I'm not starting a war over a missed shipment, but he needs to understand there are consequences. Another pause, and Raphael's voice dropped to something even more dangerous. Break his hand, the right one, and make sure everyone knows why. Isabella must have made some sound because Raphael turned sharply, his eyes finding hers. Something shifted in his expression, not quite softening, but adjusting, like a predator remembering to appear human. I'll call you back, he said into the phone, then ended the call without waiting for a response. They stared at each other across the sun-drenched terrace, the morning suddenly heavy with unspoken things. I didn't mean for you to hear that, Raphael said finally. But it's what you do. Isabella's voice was steadier than she felt. This is who you are. Yes. He didn't apologize, didn't make excuses. I told you I was a monster, Isabella. That part wasn't a lie. Just the kind part was? Raphael's jaw tightened. I haven't lied to you about anything. You ordered someone's hand broken like you were discussing the weather. She moved closer, driven by something she couldn't name, anger maybe, or the need to understand. How am I supposed to reconcile that with the man who let me sleep alone last night? You're not supposed to reconcile it. Raphael set his phone down on the terrace table with careful precision. I'm not asking you to accept what I do or who I am. I'm asking you to understand that in my world, mercy is weakness, and weakness gets you killed. But what happens between us in private, that's different. Why? Why is it different? Because you didn't choose this. The words came out harsh, almost angry. Because you're not part of my business, not part of the violence and the decisions that keep my empire intact. He stopped, seeming to struggle. You're separate from all of that. Isabella laughed,
but there was no humor in it. I'm your wife. I'm wearing your name. How can I possibly be separate from what you are? Raphael crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and Isabella instinctively backed up until she hit the terrace railing.
He stopped just short of touching her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the intensity radiating off him like heat. "Because I say you are," he said, his voice low and fierce. "In my world, my word is law. And I'm telling you, you're protected from this life, from the ugliness of what I have to do to maintain power. You don't have to like me, Isabella. You don't have to forgive your father or accept your situation. But you do have to trust that when I give you my word, I keep it." "How can I trust someone who breaks people without hesitation?" "Because the people I break are in my world by choice. They know the rules, accept the risks. You didn't choose any of this." His hands gripped the railing on either side of her, caging her in without actually touching. "Do you understand the difference?" Isabella's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. "You're still asking me to live with a man who does terrible things. I'm asking you to live with a man who keeps you safe while doing terrible things. There's a distinction. That's a very convenient philosophy. It's survival." Raphael pushed back from the railing, giving her space again. "For both of us." The tension broke like a snapped wire, leaving Isabella trembling and Raphael looking almost as unsettled as she felt. He turned away, staring out at the Mediterranean stretching endlessly blue beyond the terrace. "I have meetings today," he said, his voice returning to something more controlled. "Business that can't be postponed. You're free to explore the house, the grounds. There's a library inside if you want something to read. The car and driver are at your disposal if you want to go into town, though I'd ask that you take one of my men with you for safety." "Whose safety? Mine or yours?" Raphael glanced back at her, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Both. You're a DeLuca now. That makes you a target for my enemies and a representative of my power. Either way, you don't go anywhere alone. So I'm a prisoner? You're protected. There's a difference." "You keep saying that. I'm not sure I believe it." "Then don't." Raphael collected his phone and moved toward the door. "Believe what you want, Isabella, but stay safe while you're deciding." He left her alone on the terrace, the sea breeze carrying the scent of salt and roses, and Isabella realized she was shaking. Not from fear this time, but from something else. Anger, maybe, or the slow burn of rebellion she'd been suppressing since her father first told her about the marriage contract. Raphael DeLuca thought he could compartmentalize her, keep her separate from his violence while binding her to him with promises and careful distance. He thought his word was enough to make her trust him, accept this life, play the role he'd assigned her. He was wrong. Isabella didn't know what she was going to do yet, didn't have a plan or even a clear idea of what resistance looked like when you were trapped in a marriage to one of the most powerful criminals in Sicily. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going to simply accept this. She wasn't going to be the quiet, obedient wife Raphael expected. She was going to find a way to take back some piece of herself, even if she had to steal it from the man who thought he owned her. The question was how. Isabella spent the morning exploring the farmhouse with the wary curiosity of someone mapping an escape route. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, rooms flowing into each other with the organic logic of a building that had grown over generations rather than being designed all at once. She found the library Raphael had mentioned, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with everything from Italian classics to contemporary thrillers, books in multiple languages suggesting either eclectic taste or multiple previous owners. She pulled down a worn copy of Dante's Inferno and carried it to a window seat overlooking the gardens. Appropriate reading material, she thought bitterly, for someone living in her own personal hell. But she couldn't focus on the words. Her mind kept circling back to Raphael, to the contradictions he embodied, to the casual way he'd ordered violence and then offered her breakfast with a rose. Who was the real man? The ruthless crime lord or the surprisingly gentle husband? Or was he somehow both? And if so, which version would she be living with? "Mrs. DeLuca?" Isabella looked up to find an older woman in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression professionally neutral. "I'm Maria, the housekeeper. Mr. DeLuca asked me to check if you needed anything." "I'm fine, thank you." Isabella set the book aside. "How long have you worked for Raphael?" 15 years, Signora, since he first acquired this property."
And in those 15 years, have there been other women here? The question slipped out before Isabella could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. What did it matter if Raphael had brought lovers here? They weren't in a real marriage. But Maria's expression softened slightly. You're the first woman Mr. DeLuca has brought to this house. He's always kept it private, separate from his business life. That you're here, it means something. It means I'm his wife. It means more than that. Maria moved into the room, her movements economical and precise. I've watched Mr. DeLuca for many years. I've seen him be cruel, ruthless, even cold. But I've also seen him be fair and protective of those under his care. He's not an easy man, Signora, but he's not a bad one either. He breaks people who disappoint him. He protects people who depend on him. Maria's tone was firm. In his world, those things are often the same. But you're not in his world, are you? You're in this house, separate and safe. That's what matters. Isabella wanted to argue, to reject this philosophy that everyone around Raphael seemed to share, this idea that violence was acceptable as long as it was directed outward, that she should be grateful for protection she'd never asked for. But Maria was already moving toward the door, clearly considering the conversation finished. Lunch will be ready at 1 o'clock, Signora. Shall I serve it on the terrace? That's fine. Thank you, Maria. Alone again, Isabella returned to the window and stared out at gardens that looked like paradise and felt like a cage. She thought about her siblings, Lucia, who should be worrying about school and boys instead of grateful that her sister had saved her from an arranged marriage, Marco, who should be studying medicine without the weight of debt crushing his future. They were safe because of her sacrifice. But what about her? Who was going to save her? The answer, she realized with a clarity that was almost painful, was no one. If Isabella wanted to survive this with any part of herself intact, she would have to save herself. Raphael returned just after 3 in the afternoon, looking tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Isabella was back on the terrace with her book, though she still hadn't managed to read more than a few pages. She heard the car first, then his footsteps inside the house, then the door opening behind her. "You're still here." He sounded almost surprised. Isabella didn't turn around. "Where else would I go?" "I don't know. I thought you might have run." Raphael moved to lean against the terrace railing, his back to the sea, studying her. "You have that look about you." "What look?" "Like you're calculating escape routes." Now Isabella did look at him and was startled by what she saw. His shirt was wrinkled. There was a smudge of something dark on his collar that might have been blood, and his eyes held a weariness that made him look older than his 34 years. "Rough day at the office?" she asked, her tone sharper than intended. Raphael's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You could say that. Someone tried to challenge my authority over the northern ports. I had to remind them why that was a mistake." "Did your reminder involve broken bones?" "Among other things." He studied her for a long moment. "Does it help if I tell you they deserved it?" "Does it matter if it helps?" "Probably not." Raphael pushed away from the railing and dropped into the chair across from her. "But I'm trying to be honest with you, Isabella. You asked what kind of man I am. This is the answer. I do what needs to be done to maintain power, to keep my people safe, to ensure that threats are neutralized before they become problems. It's not pretty, and I'm not asking you to approve, but it's reality." Isabella set her book down carefully. "And what happens when I become a problem? When I don't live up to expectations or say the wrong thing or embarrass you in front of your associates? Do I get the same treatment as your business rivals?" Raphael's expression went cold, and for the first time since she'd met him, Isabella saw genuine anger flash across his face. "If you truly believe I would hurt you, then you haven't been paying attention." "I don't know what to believe. Yesterday you ordered someone's hand broken. Today you're sitting here trying to convince me you're not a monster. Which is it, Raphael? Which version of you is real?" "Both." The word was simple, devastating. "I'm both, Isabella. I'm the man who does terrible things to protect what's mine, and I'm the man who's trying very hard not to terrify you more than you already are. I contain multitudes just like anyone else. The difference is I don't apologize for what I am." "Maybe you should." Raphael leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on her. "Would it change anything if I did? Would you suddenly trust me, accept this marriage, stop looking at me like I'm a monster you're trapped with? Apologies are meaningless without changed behavior, and I'm not going to change. This is who I am, Isabella. The question is whether you can live with that. I don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Raphael's voice softened slightly. I told you, you want to leave. I won't stop you. But you need to understand the consequences. Without my protection, without the DeLuca name, you and your family become vulnerable again. Your father's debts might be paid, but he's made enemies. Enemies who would love nothing more than to hurt Antonio Romano through his children. Isabella's hands clenched in her lap. So I can choose between staying with you or endangering everyone I love. That's not really a choice.
No, Raphael agreed quietly.
It's not. But it's more than most people in your situation get. The honesty of it was somehow worse than lies would have been. He wasn't even pretending she had real freedom, wasn't sugarcoating the trap she was in, just laying out the reality with brutal clarity and waiting to see what she'd do with it. Why do you care? Isabella asked, the question surprising even herself. You could have forced me last night. You could force me now. You could ignore what I want entirely and just take what you paid for. Why don't you? Raphael was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw in a way she hadn't heard before. Because I've taken enough in my life. I've taken power, territory, money, lives. I've taken everything I needed to build this empire. But you... He met her eyes, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. You didn't sign up for this. You were offered up like a sacrifice. And every time I look at you, I see that terror in your eyes, and I think, how did I become the kind of man who inspires that fear in an innocent woman? You ordered someone's hand broken this morning. And he knew the risks when he entered my world. You didn't. Raphael stood abruptly, as if he couldn't sit still any longer. I'm not looking for redemption, Isabella. I know what I am, and I'm not ashamed of it. But I'm trying, probably failing, but trying, not to make you pay for choices you never got to make. Isabella stood too, driven by an impulse she didn't understand. What do you want from me, Raphael? Really? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. I wanted a strategic alliance, a wife who understood her role and played it well, someone who could help me build legitimacy and produce heirs to secure my legacy. But now... He stopped, frustration clear in every line of his body. Now I don't know what I want, except maybe for you to stop looking at me like I'm going to hurt you. Then stop doing things that make me afraid. I can't. Not if I want to keep you safe, keep my empire intact. The violence isn't going to stop, Isabella. It's part of who I am and what I do. Then we're at an impasse. Apparently so. They stood facing each other across the terrace, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Two people bound together by contracts and circumstances, neither of them sure how to move forward, both of them too stubborn to back down. I'm going for a walk, Isabella said finally, needing to escape the intensity of his presence. Alone. Raphael's jaw tightened. Take Marco with you. The property is secure, but I said alone. And I said it's not safe. Then I guess you'll have to trust that I won't run away and destroy your careful plans. Isabella moved past him toward the garden path, then stopped and looked back. That's what you want, isn't it? Trust? Well, it works both ways, Raphael. If you want me to trust you, you need to trust me too. She didn't wait for his response, just walked away with her head high and her heart pounding, half expecting him to call her back or follow her. He did neither, and Isabella didn't know whether to be relieved or disappointed. The gardens were extensive, terraced down the hillside in a series of carefully planned levels. Isabella walked without direction, following stone paths between beds of lavender and rosemary, past fountains where water trickled over ancient stone, through arbors heavy with climbing roses. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. This paradise she was trapped in, this gilded cage with a monster as her keeper. Except Raphael wasn't quite a monster, was he? Monsters didn't let their terrified bride sleep alone. Monsters didn't look exhausted and conflicted. Monsters didn't admit to uncertainty or try to explain themselves. Raphael DeLuca was something more complicated. A man who'd built an empire on violence and fear, but who seemed genuinely troubled by the fear he inspired in her. A man capable of ruthless cruelty who treated her with unexpected gentleness. A man of contradiction she couldn't reconcile no matter how hard she tried. Isabella found herself at the edge of the property,
where the cultivated gardens gave way to wild hillside covered in scrub and wildflowers. A low stone wall marked the boundary, and beyond it, the land dropped away steeply toward the sea. The view was breathtaking, endless blue water meeting endless blue sky, the kind of vista that inspired poets and painters. She sat on the wall and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The fear, yes, but also the anger. The grief for the life she'd lost. The resentment toward her father for putting her in this position. The confusion about Raphael and his contradictions. The exhaustion of constantly being on guard, constantly analyzing every word and gesture for hidden threats. "You're crying." Isabella spun around to find Raphael standing a few feet behind her, his hands in his pockets, his expression carefully neutral. How long had he been there? How much had he seen? "I told you I wanted to be alone," she said, swiping at her tears with angry hands. "I know, but you were right. Trust works both ways. I trusted you not to run. Now I'm asking you to trust me enough to let me sit with you." Isabella wanted to refuse, to send him away and maintain her defiance. But she was tired of fighting, tired of being strong, tired of pretending she had any control over her situation. "Sit if you want. I can't stop you anyway." Raphael lowered himself onto the wall beside her, careful to maintain distance between them. They sat in silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of fire, and Isabella felt something shift in the space between them. Not quite acceptance, not even close to trust, but maybe the first tentative step toward coexistence. "I'm sorry," Raphael said finally, "for all of it, for your father's debts, for the contract, for the position you're in. I'm sorry. Earlier you said apologies were meaningless without changed behavior. I did, and I meant it. I'm not going to change, Isabella, but I'm sorry that my ambition and your father's weakness combined to trap you here." Isabella turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw something raw in his expression. Regret, maybe. Or recognition of the cost of getting everything he'd wanted. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. "I don't know. Figure it out as we go, I suppose." Raphael's smile was sad. "I'm not very good at this. At relationships, at considering someone else's feelings, at any of it. I'm good at strategy and power and control. But this? I'm lost." The admission was so honest, so unexpected, that Isabella felt her carefully maintained anger crack slightly. "I'm lost too," she confessed. "I don't know how to be your wife. I don't know how to live in this world. I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're Isabella De Luca. You're brave, braver than you know. You sacrificed yourself to save your family, and you haven't broken despite everything that's been thrown at you." Raphael paused. "You're also angry, which is good. Anger means you're fighting. I can work with fighting. It's the broken ones I don't know how to help. I don't want to be broken. Then don't be. Stay angry. Stay defiant. Keep challenging me and questioning me and refusing to simply accept this situation." Raphael turned to face her fully. "I don't want a docile wife, Isabella. I want—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I want someone who sees who I am and isn't afraid to call me on it. Someone who will be a partner, not a possession." "That's not what the contract says." "The contract is just paper. What matters is what we decide it means." Isabella studied him in the fading light, this complicated man who terrified and confused her in equal measure. "What if I decide it means I get a say in my own life? That I'm not just property to be directed and controlled?" "Then that's what it means." Raphael's voice was firm. "Within reason. I can't promise you complete freedom, not when your safety depends on certain restrictions. But a say in your life, a voice in decisions that affect you, that I can give you." "Why should I believe you?" "Because unlike your father, I keep my promises. Test me, Isabella. Push boundaries, make demands, see what happens. You might be surprised." The sun touched the horizon, turning everything molten gold, and Isabella made a decision. She didn't trust Raphael. Not yet, maybe not ever. But she believed he meant what he said about keeping promises. And if she was going to survive this marriage with her soul intact, she needed to start claiming space for herself. "I want to see my family," she said. "Soon. Not supervised visits or phone calls, actual time with my mother and siblings. Done. Tomorrow if you want. I want access to money, my own account,
not having to ask you for every purchase. I'll set it up in the morning. What else? The ease of his agreement startled her. You're just going to give me everything I ask for?
If it's reasonable and doesn't compromise your safety, yes. What did you expect, Isabella? That I'd deny you basic dignity?
Raphael stood, offering his hand to help her up. I may be a lot of things, but I'm not petty. You want independence within this marriage? You'll get it. You want respect? You'll have it. All I ask in return is that you play the role of my wife in public and that you trust me to keep you safe.
Isabella ignored his outstretched hand and stood on her own, but the gesture felt less like defiance
and more like maintaining her boundaries. And in private, what do you expect there? Raphael's expression became unreadable. In private, I expect nothing. You're not willing to give. We have time, Isabella. Despite what the contract says, despite what your father might have told you, we have time to figure out what this marriage becomes. They walked back to the house together as darkness fell, not touching, but no longer quite so distant. Isabella didn't know if this fragile détente would hold, didn't know if she could truly build a life with a man who ordered violence as easily as he ordered breakfast. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she had some small measure of control. It wasn't freedom, it wasn't even close, but it was something, and right now something was enough. Dinner that night was a quiet affair, just the two of them at a table set for intimacy. Maria had prepared traditional Sicilian dishes, pasta con le sarde, involtini, cassata for dessert, and the food was delicious enough that Isabella found herself actually tasting it, actually hungry for the first time in days. Maria's been with me since I bought this house, Raphael said, refilling her wine glass. She practically raised me after my parents died. If you need anything, she's completely trustworthy. How old were you when you lost them? 17. Car accident, or at least that's what the official report said. Raphael's tone suggested he didn't entirely believe it. Old enough to inherit the family business, young enough to have no idea what I was doing. I made a lot of mistakes in those early years. But you survived. I did more than survive. I thrived. Expanded operations, eliminated rivals, built something bigger than what my father left me. He paused. Of course, I also became someone he wouldn't recognize, someone harder, colder, someone who could order a man's hand broken without flinching. Isabella set down her fork. Do you regret it? Becoming this person? Raphael considered the question seriously. No, I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret the choices I made. This world, my world, doesn't reward mercy or hesitation. I did what I had to do to survive and protect what was mine. I'd do it again. Even knowing the cost? Especially knowing the cost. His eyes met hers across the table. But I'm beginning to understand that there are different kinds of costs, the ones I anticipated and the ones I didn't. Like me? Like you. Raphael's smile was rueful. You were supposed to be simple, Isabella. A transaction, an alliance. Instead, you're... He stopped, shaking his head. Complicated. You're very complicated. So are you. They finished dinner with careful conversation, topics that skated around anything too personal or dangerous. Books they'd read, places they'd traveled, neutral ground that allowed them to learn about each other without revealing too much. It felt almost normal, almost like two people getting to know each other rather than two prisoners of circumstance trying to find common ground. When Maria cleared the dessert plates, Raphael stood and extended his hand. Walk with me? Isabella hesitated, then accepted. His hand was warm around hers, and she waited for fear to spike through her at the contact. It didn't come, or rather, it came muted, manageable, no longer the overwhelming terror of the day before. Maybe she was adjusting, or maybe she was just too exhausted to maintain constant vigilance. Raphael led her to the library, where a fire crackled in the stone fireplace despite the mild evening. He released her hand and moved to a shelf, pulling down a slim volume bound in leather. This was my grandmother's, he said, offering it to Isabella. Poetry, mostly. She used to read to me from it when I was young. I thought you might like it. Isabella accepted the book carefully, touched by the gesture despite herself. Thank you. You don't have to thank me for basic kindness, remember? Maybe I want to. She moved to the window seat, curling up with the book in her lap. Raphael, why are you trying so hard? With me, I mean. It would be easier to just demand obedience and ignore my feelings. Raphael settled into a leather chair across from her, his expression thoughtful. Because I've spent my entire adult life taking the easy path when it comes to power. Demand, take, control. It's what I know. But with you, he paused, choosing his words carefully. With you, I want to try something different. Not because I've suddenly developed a conscience, but because you deserve better than to be just another thing I've acquired. I don't understand you. I don't understand myself lately. Raphael's laugh was self-deprecating. A week ago, I would have told you I was incapable of this, of caring about someone else's feelings, of putting anyone's needs before my own strategic interests. But then you walked into that hall, terrified and trapped, and something shifted. I looked at you and saw... He stopped, frustration clear in his voice. I saw someone who deserved a choice, and I realized I'd taken that from you. Isabella's throat tightened. You can't give it back. No, but I can try to make the cage more comfortable. I can give you as much freedom as I safely can. I can treat you like a person instead of property. His eyes were intense on hers. It's not enough, I know, but it's all I have to offer. They sat in silence, broken only by the crackling fire, two people trying to build something real from the wreckage of a forced alliance. It wasn't love. Isabella wasn't foolish enough to confuse this tentative connection for that. But it was something. Understanding, maybe. Or at least the willingness to try. I'm going to bed, Isabella said finally, setting the book aside. Thank you for dinner, and for the book, and for trying. Raphael stood when she did, old world manners asserting themselves. Isabella, tomorrow, when you see your family, tell them whatever you want about me, about this marriage. Tell them I'm a monster or a saint or anything in between, but make sure they know you're safe. Your mother looked haunted at the wedding. She deserves to know her daughter is okay. Am I okay? Are you? Isabella considered the question honestly. I don't know yet, but I'm alive and I'm not broken. For now, that's enough. She left him standing in the firelight and climbed the stairs to her room. Her room now with its walls and space and door she could close against the world. Once inside, she pulled out her phone and composed a text to her sister Lucia. I'm okay, really. It's complicated, but I'm okay. Tell Mama not to worry. I'll see you all tomorrow. The response came almost immediately, as if Lucia had been waiting by her phone. Is he nice to you? Papa said he would be, but I was so worried. Isabella stared at the screen trying to figure out how to answer. Was Raphael nice? He was gentle and harsh, considerate and ruthless, trying and failing and trying again. He's complicated, she typed back. But yes, he's nice to me. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. And for now, in the strange new reality she was navigating, that was the best she could offer. Isabella changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, exhausted but somehow less afraid than she'd been the night before. Through the walls, she could hear Raphael moving around in his room, the guest room he'd chosen to give her space, to keep his promise, to try to be better than the monster his reputation suggested. Tomorrow she'd see her family, reclaim some piece of her old life, remember who she'd been before she became Mrs. DeLuca. And maybe in the process, she'd start to figure out who she could become in this new life she hadn't chosen, but was learning to navigate. It wasn't freedom, it wasn't even happiness, but it was survival, and survival was the first step towards something more. Isabella closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, and for the first time in 3 days, she slept without nightmares. In his room down the hall, Raphael sat on the edge of his bed and stared at his hands. Hands that had built an empire, hands that had taken lives, hands that tomorrow would sign documents giving his wife financial independence and access to her family. He'd meant what he told Isabella about not understanding himself lately, about something shifting when he'd looked into her terrified eyes and seen the cost of his ambition reflected back at him. He was Raphael DeLuca, feared and respected across Sicily. He'd clawed his way to power through ruthlessness and strategy, and he'd never apologized for what that required. But Isabella made him want to be something more. Not soft, never that, but maybe more human. More capable of connection than calculation. It was dangerous, this wanting. In his world, caring about someone made you vulnerable.
But as he lay back and closed his eyes, Raphael found he didn't care about the danger. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt like he was building something that mattered beyond power and territory. He was building a marriage, a real one, messy and complicated and nothing like what he'd planned. And against all odds, he was looking forward to seeing where it led. The drive to her family's home felt surreal, like stepping back into a life that no longer fit. Isabella sat in the back of Raphael's Mercedes, watching familiar streets pass by the tinted windows, and felt like a ghost returning to haunt her own past. Marco, Raphael's Marco, not her brother, drove in silence, respecting her need for quiet, while another of Raphael's men followed in a second car. Protection, Raphael had called it. A cage on wheels, Isabella thought, though she kept the observation to herself. Raphael hadn't come, he'd offered to, had even started to get ready, but Isabella had stopped him with a hand on his arm and a simple request for space. To his credit, he'd agreed immediately, though she'd seen something flash across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or concern that she wouldn't come back. She would come back. That was the truly surreal part. She actually planned to return to the farmhouse, to Raphael, to the strange new life they were building from broken pieces and tentative truces. Not because she had to, though that was certainly true, but because some part of her wanted to see where this fragile understanding between them might lead. The thought terrified her almost as much as Raphael himself had 3 days ago. Her childhood home looked smaller than she remembered, the paint more faded, the garden less tended. Evidence of her father's decline, she supposed. The slow erosion of pride and resources that had led him to gamble away everything, including his daughter. Isabella's hands clenched in her lap as Marco opened her door, and she had to force herself to breathe through the surge of anger that threatened to overwhelm her. Her mother must have been watching from the window because the front door flew open before Isabella reached it, and Gabriella Romano came rushing out, tears already streaming down her face. "Isabella, oh, my baby, my sweet girl." Gabriella pulled her into a fierce embrace that smelled of lavender and desperation. "I've been so worried. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just thinking about you alone with that man." "I'm fine, Mama." Isabella returned the embrace, feeling her mother's fragility, the way she seemed to have lost weight in just 3 days. "I'm okay, really." Gabriella pulled back, gripping Isabella's shoulders and studying her face with a mother's acute perception. "Are you? Tell me the truth, Kara. Has he hurt you?" "No." The answer came easier than Isabella expected. "He hasn't hurt me. But has he?" Gabriella couldn't quite form the question, but Isabella understood what she was asking. "He's given me my own room, my own space. He's been," Isabella searched for the right word, "respectful." The relief that flooded her mother's face was almost painful to witness. "Thank the saints. Your father said he would be, said DeLuca was a man of honor, despite his reputation. But I was so afraid." "Where's Papa?" Isabella's voice went cold. Gabriella's expression shuddered. "In his study. He's not well, Isabella. The guilt is eating him alive." "Good." The word came out harsh, unforgiving. "It should." "Isabella, No, Mama. Don't defend him. Not to me, not after what he did." Isabella moved past her mother into the house, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. "Where are Lucia and Marco?" "In the kitchen. They've been waiting for you." Isabella found her siblings exactly where her mother said, sitting at the old wooden table where they'd shared 1,000 family meals. Lucia jumped up the moment Isabella entered, her 16-year-old face a mix of relief and guilt and desperate hope. "Bella!" Her sister crashed into her, and Isabella wrapped her arms around the girl who'd been spared her fate. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Shh, it's okay." Isabella smoothed Lucia's dark hair, the same color as her own. "This isn't your fault, but it should have been me. Papa said if you didn't agree, I would have to, and that's exactly why I agreed." Isabella pulled back to look her sister in the eye. "You're 16, Lucia. You deserve to finish school, to fall in love, to have choices. I couldn't let him take that from you." Her brother Marco stood more slowly, his medical textbook spread across the table, his young face aged by the knowledge of what his sister had sacrificed for his education. At 19, he looked like a man struggling with impossible debts of gratitude. "Isabella," his voice cracked, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to. You don't say anything. You just keep studying. Keep pursuing your dream of becoming a doctor. That's how you repay me, by making sure my sacrifice meant something. Marco crossed to her, and the three siblings stood together in a tight circle, holding each other the way they had as children when their parents fought, when the world felt too big and scary. Except now the world was bigger and scarier than any of them had imagined, and Isabella was the one who'd stepped into the darkness to keep the others safe. Is he terrible? Lucia whispered. Your husband? Isabella thought about Raphael standing in the firelight, admitting he didn't understand himself anymore. Raphael ordering violence with one breath and offering her poetry with the next. Raphael giving her space and freedom within the confines of their arrangement, trying in his complicated way to make the cage more bearable. He's complicated, Isabella said finally. But no, he's not terrible to me. Can you be happy there? Marco asked, his eyes too knowing for 19. I don't know yet, but I can survive there. And maybe that's enough for now. They sat together at the kitchen table, and Isabella told them carefully edited versions of the last 3 days. The farmhouse overlooking the sea, the library full of books, Maria the housekeeper who'd practically raised Raphael. She left out the terror of the wedding night, the overheard phone call ordering broken bones, the confusing push and pull of wanting to hate a man who kept surprising her with unexpected gentleness. Lucia hung on every word, young enough to find romance even in a forced marriage. Marco listened with the analytical attention he brought to his medical studies, trying to diagnose the health of Isabella's situation. Their mother hovered nearby, wringing her hands and offering food no one wanted. It was Antonio Romano who finally shattered the fragile peace. He appeared in the kitchen doorway looking exactly as he had at the wedding, pale, sweating, guilty. But now there was something else in his expression too. Relief. The crushing weight of debt had been lifted, his children's futures secured, and all it had cost him was his daughter's freedom. Isabella felt rage rise in her throat like bile. Isabella? His voice was tentative, almost pleading. You're home. This isn't my home anymore. Isabella stood slowly, her voice deadly calm. My home is wherever my husband decides it should be. That was the arrangement, wasn't it, Papa? That was the price you agreed to when you sold me. I didn't sell you. Then what would you call it? Isabella's control snapped, and years of being the dutiful daughter, the peacemaker, the good girl who never caused trouble, shattered like glass. You gambled away everything we had. You made promises to dangerous men that you couldn't keep, and when they came to collect, you offered me up like a sacrificial lamb to save yourself. What is that if not selling your own daughter? I had no choice. Antonio's face flushed red. They were going to kill me, Isabella. They were going to take everything, hurt all of you. So you hurt me instead. Isabella's laugh was bitter. You wrapped it up in pretty words about family and duty and sacrifice, but the truth is, you saved yourself and let me pay the price. Rafael De Luca gave his word you'd be treated well. Rafael De Luca is a criminal, a man who breaks people for disappointing him. You married me to a stranger, a dangerous man, without even asking if that's what I wanted. Isabella's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. Did you even consider saying no? Did you even try to find another way? Antonio's shoulders sagged. There was no other way. I looked, Isabella. I swear I looked. Not hard enough. Isabella turned away from him, unable to bear looking at his face any longer. Not nearly hard enough. He's keeping his word, though, isn't he? Antonio's voice turned almost wheedling. You said he's been good to you, that he's given you your own space. That's what I negotiated for, what I insisted on. Isabella spun back to face him, and something in her expression made him take a step back. You don't get credit for negotiating basic human dignity, Papa. You don't get to feel proud that the man you sold me to isn't raping me. The crude word made her mother gasp, made Lucia's eyes go wide, but Isabella didn't care. You want absolution? You want me to tell you it's okay that you did what you had to do? I won't. I can't. Because every time I look at you, all I see is the man who chose his own survival over his daughter's freedom. The kitchen fell silent except for Gabriella's quiet sobbing. Lucia and Marco sat frozen, caught between their father and their sister, unsure where their loyalty should land, and Antonio stood in the doorway looking like a man who'd been sentenced to death, which, in a way,
Isabella supposed he had been. I'll never forgive you, Isabella said quietly, each word precise and devastating. I'll play the role you and Raphael agreed to. I'll protect this family because I love Mama and Lucia and Marco. But you and I? We're done, Papa. You're nothing to me now. She brushed past him without another word, heading for the door, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but in this house that still smelled like her childhood, but felt like a tomb. Outside, Marco the driver straightened from where he'd been leaning against the car. Mrs. DeLuca, is everything all right? No. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, fighting for composure. But it will be. I just need a moment. She walked to the small garden her mother had tried to maintain despite everything, finding the stone bench where she used to sit as a girl and dream about her future. Such foolish dreams, full of love and choice and possibilities that had never been real. The world didn't work the way she'd imagined it would. Power and debt and violence. Those were the real forces that shaped lives, and romantic notions about freedom were luxuries reserved for people who'd never been desperate. Isabella? She looked up to find her brother Marco, her actual brother, not Raphael's second-in-command, standing at the edge of the garden. He approached cautiously, as if she might shatter at any sudden movement. Can I sit? He asked. Isabella nodded, and he settled beside her on the bench. That was brutal, he said after a moment. What you said to Papa. It was honest. Yeah, that's what made it brutal. Marco stared at the overgrown roses that had once been their mother's pride. He deserved it, though, every word. You don't have to take my side against him. I'm not taking sides. I'm acknowledging reality. Marco turned to look at her, his eyes serious behind his glasses. He sold you, Bella. He might have had his reasons, might have been desperate and scared, but that doesn't change what he did. You have every right to be angry. Isabella felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. I hate him. I hate that I still love him despite everything, but I also hate him so much I can barely breathe when I look at his face. That's allowed. Both things can be true. They sat in silence for a moment, the autumn sun warm on their faces, the sound of traffic distant and ordinary. It felt surreal to Isabella that the world just kept moving, that people were going about their normal lives while hers had been fundamentally altered. Is your husband really okay? Marco asked. Or were you just saying that to keep us from worrying? Isabella considered the question carefully. He's complicated. He does terrible things. I've heard him order violence, seen the evidence of what he's capable of. But with me, he's been... She struggled to find the right words. Gentle, careful. He's trying to give me as much freedom as the situation allows. I don't understand him, Marco. I don't know if he's genuinely trying to be better or if this is just another form of control. Maybe it's both. How can it be both? Marco shrugged. People are complicated. Maybe he's capable of being ruthless in business and gentle with you. Maybe those things don't contradict each other in his mind. That's what he said, that he contains multitudes. Then maybe believe him. Marco bumped his shoulder against hers the way he used to when they were kids. I know it's not what you wanted, Bella. I know you should have had choices and love and all the things you dreamed about. But if you have to be in this situation, at least you're with someone who seems to recognize your humanity. That's something. It's not enough. No. But it's better than the alternative. Isabella leaned her head on her brother's shoulder and let herself feel the grief of everything she'd lost. Not just her freedom, though that was part of it, but also the innocence of believing the world was fair, that good things happened to good people, that love conquered all. Those illusions had died in a Baroque chapel 3 days ago, and Isabella was still learning how to navigate a reality built on power and pragmatism instead of hope and romance. I should go, she said finally, straightening. Raphael will worry if I'm gone too long. Marco studied her face. You care what he thinks, what he feels. No, Isabella stopped, honesty forcing its way through her denials. Maybe. I don't know. It's confusing. That's okay too. You don't have to have it all figured out. Isabella stood and pulled her brother into a tight embrace. Take care of Mama and Lucia, and yourself. Study hard, become an amazing doctor, save lives. Make all of this mean something. I will. I promise.
Marco held her at arm's length, his expression fierce. And Bella? If he ever hurts you, if he ever stops being gentle, you call me immediately. I don't care how powerful he is. You're my sister, and I'll find a way to get you out. The offer was impossible, impractical, and completely sincere. Isabella felt her heart crack a little at her brother's fierce protectiveness, his willingness to fight battles he couldn't possibly win if it meant keeping her safe. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I'll be okay. I'm stronger than I thought I was." She said goodbye to her mother and Lucia, endured her father's attempt at an apology that she cut off with a raised hand and a cold look, and finally climbed back into the Mercedes where Marco the driver was waiting patiently. "Back to the farmhouse, Mrs. DeLuca?" Isabella settled into the leather seat and watched her childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror. "Yes, take me home." The word felt strange in her mouth. Home, as if the farmhouse had already become that in just 3 days. But it was the truth, she realized. Her old life was gone, sealed behind her like a door that could never reopen. Whatever lay ahead was home now, for better or worse. Raphael was on the terrace when Isabella arrived, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gripping the railing with white-knuckled intensity. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression shifted, tension draining away, replaced by relief so visible it surprised her. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, then ended the call without waiting for a response. "How was it?" Isabella dropped into the chair across from him, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "I told my father I'd never forgive him." Raphael's eyebrows rose slightly. "How did he take that?" "About as well as you'd expect. My mother cried. My siblings tried to mediate. And I realized that the family I sacrificed everything for isn't the same family I left 3 days ago." Isabella looked out at the sea, unable to meet Raphael's eyes. "Or maybe I'm the one who's different." "Probably both." Raphael set his phone aside and studied her. "Do you regret it? Seeing them?" "No, I needed to. I needed to say the things I've been holding back, needed to stop pretending everything was okay." Isabella finally looked at him. "I told them you've been good to me." That surprised them. "Did it surprise you that you said it?" "A little. But it's true, isn't it? You have been good to me, by your standards anyway." Raphael's smile was rueful. "My standards are admittedly low." "Are they?" Isabella leaned forward, genuine curiosity overriding her exhaustion. "You keep saying that, keep acting like basic decency is some grand gesture. But Raphael, you've given me freedom within this marriage, respected boundaries I didn't even know I could set, treated me like a person instead of property. That's not low standards, that's—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. "That's what, Isabella?" "That's more than I expected, more than I thought I had any right to hope for." The admission felt dangerous, like giving him ammunition he could use against her. But Isabella was too tired to maintain her walls. "I don't understand you. I don't understand how you can be ruthless and gentle, cruel and kind, all at the same time." Raphael was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the terrace. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with something that might have been old pain. "When I was 19, I watched my father's second-in-command betray him to a rival family. The man had been like an uncle to me, someone I trusted completely. And he sold my father out for money and territory, orchestrated his death and made it look like an accident." Raphael's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "I was young, untested, and suddenly in charge of an empire full of people waiting to see if I'd be strong enough to hold it. So I became what I needed to be. Hard, ruthless, unforgiving. I eliminated anyone who showed even a hint of disloyalty. I built a reputation for being merciless because mercy was what got my father killed." Isabella listened without interrupting, seeing for the first time the boy beneath the monster. "For 15 years, that's who I've been. Raphael DeLuca, the man you don't cross, the capo who rules through fear and absolute control. And it worked. I built something bigger and stronger than what my father left me. But somewhere along the way, I forgot." He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I forgot that there was supposed to be more to life than just survival and power. I forgot what it felt like to care about someone's feelings, to consider someone else's needs. I became exactly what I needed to be to survive, and I lost everything else in the process." "Until?" Isabella prompted softly. Until 3 days ago, when I looked into your eyes and saw what I'd become reflected back. Not a powerful capo or a strategic genius, or any of the things I'd built my identity around. Just a man who'd become a monster, and a terrified girl who'd been sacrificed to feed that monster's ambitions. Raphael finally looked at her, and his expression was raw. You made me remember, Isabella. Remember that I used to be someone who cared about things beyond power. Someone who had dreams that didn't involve breaking people who disappointed me. Someone who might have been capable of... He stopped abruptly as if he'd revealed too much. Capable of what? Isabella whispered. Of being the kind of man you could choose instead of being forced to accept. The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and dangerous. Isabella felt her heart hammering, felt something shift in her chest that she absolutely could not afford to feel. This was Raphael De Luca, a crime lord who ordered violence without hesitation. She shouldn't allow herself to feel anything for him beyond wary respect and mutual survival. But looking at him now, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the ghost of the boy he'd been before the world had forced him to become something harder, Isabella felt her carefully maintained distance crack. You can't go back, she said finally. You can't unbecome what you are. The things you've done, the reputation you've built, that's not going away just because you feel guilty about how we met. I know. Raphael's voice was resigned. I'm not looking for redemption, Isabella. I know I'm beyond that. But maybe I can be something slightly less monstrous going forward. Maybe I can find some balance between what I have to be for my empire and what I want to be for what? For you. The words were simple, devastating. Isabella felt them land like a physical blow, rearranging something fundamental in how she understood their relationship. Don't, she said, standing abruptly. Don't do that. Don't do what? Don't make this about feelings or redemption or becoming a better person for me. Raphael, I can't carry that weight. I can't be responsible for your moral awakening or whatever this is. Isabella paced to the railing, needing distance. I'm barely surviving this situation as it is. I can't also be your salvation. Raphael stood too, but he didn't approach her. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm just trying to explain why this is different. Why you're different. Because I'm the first person who is genuinely afraid of you? Because I'm the first transaction that came with a conscience? Because you're the first person in 15 years who made me want to be something other than what I am. Isabella spun to face him, anger and confusion and something dangerously close to hope warring in her chest. And what do you want to be, Raphael? What do you think you can become that's different from the man who orders broken bones over breakfast? I don't know, but I'd like the chance to find out. They stared at each other across the terrace, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. Isabella saw the truth in Raphael's eyes, the genuine confusion, the unexpected vulnerability, the desire for something he couldn't quite name, and she recognized it because she felt it too, this pull toward something that might be connection or understanding or the first fragile shoots of something more dangerous than either. I'm scared, Isabella admitted quietly. I'm scared of you, scared of this situation, scared of what I'm feeling. I don't know how to navigate this, Raphael. I don't know how to be your wife or your moral compass or whatever role you're asking me to play. Then don't navigate it. Don't play any role. Raphael moved closer, and this time Isabella didn't retreat. Just be Isabella. Be honest with me. Challenge me when I'm wrong. Call me on my contradictions. That's all I'm asking. That's not all you're asking. You're asking me to see you as something other than a monster. You're asking me to believe you're capable of change. Am I? Raphael's smile was sad. Maybe I'm just asking you to see me as a monster who's trying. That's all I've got, Isabella. A man who does terrible things but who wants to do better by you. Is that enough? Isabella didn't know how to answer. 3 days ago, she would have said nothing he could offer would ever be enough, that she would hate him until the day she died for his role in her captivity. But 3 days ago, she hadn't known about the poetry books, or the careful distance, or the admission that he didn't understand himself anymore. 3 days ago, she hadn't started to see Raphael De Luca as a person instead of a monster. I don't know, she said finally.
I honestly don't know if it's enough or if I'm just fooling myself into accepting crumbs because I'm trapped. But Raphael, she took a breath, steadying herself. I'm willing to try, to see where this goes, what we might build together. Not because I forgive you or accept this situation, but because the alternative is spending the rest of my life at war with my own husband, and I'm already tired of fighting. Raphael's expression transformed, hope lighting his features in a way that made him look younger, less burdened. That's enough. That's more than enough. He reached out slowly, giving Isabella every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm, calloused, and she could feel his pulse jumping under her fingers, evidence that he was nervous too, that this moment mattered to him in ways she was only beginning to understand. I promise you, Raphael said, his voice low and intense, I will try every day to be worthy of that willingness. I'll fail sometimes. I'm sure I'll fail often, but I'll keep trying, and I'll never take your trust for granted. Don't make promises you can't keep. I don't. Raphael's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, a gesture so gentle it made Isabella's breath catch. I keep my word, Isabella. That's one thing you can believe about me, even when you can't believe anything else. They stood together as the sun set, hands joined, both of them suspended between the reality of their forced union and the possibility of something more. It wasn't love. Isabella refused to call it that, refused to romanticize a situation born of desperation and power. But it was something. A fragile truce, a tentative connection, the first seeds of what might eventually grow into genuine partnership if they both worked at it. I'm hungry, Isabella said finally, breaking the moment before it could become too heavy. And exhausted. It was a lot. I'll tell Maria to prepare dinner. Raphael released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact. And Isabella, thank you for trying, for being willing to see me as something other than the monster your father warned you about. Don't thank me yet. I might change my mind tomorrow. Then I'll just have to make sure tomorrow is better than today. Raphael disappeared inside, leaving Isabella alone with her thoughts and the darkening sea. She touched the hand he'd held, still feeling the warmth of his skin, the gentleness of his touch, and wondered what she was doing. Was she genuinely starting to trust him, or was this some form of Stockholm syndrome, her mind adapting to captivity by finding reasons to accept her captor? Isabella didn't have answers. She just had questions and confusion and a growing awareness that Raphael De Luca was far more complicated than the simple monster narrative she'd needed him to be. Monsters were easy to hate, easy to resist. But men who admitted uncertainty, who tried despite their flaws, who looked at you with vulnerable eyes and asked for the chance to be better, those were much harder to dismiss. Dinner that evening was different from the night before. They talked more freely, the careful formality giving way to actual conversation. Raphael asked about her studies before marriage. She'd been pursuing a literature degree, dreaming of teaching, or maybe writing. Isabella asked about his childhood before tragedy struck. Summers at this very farmhouse, a grandmother who'd taught him poetry, a father who'd been harder but not unkind. They discovered shared love of old films, arguments about the superiority of different regional Italian cuisines, an unexpected mutual appreciation for terrible puns that made them both groan and laugh in equal measure. It felt almost normal, two people getting to know each other over good food and wine, if you ignored the armed guards outside and the criminal empire Raphael commanded with every phone call that interrupted their meal. I need to travel to Palermo tomorrow, Raphael said as they finished dessert. Business that requires my personal attention. I'll be gone for 2 days, maybe 3. Isabella felt an unexpected pang at the news. Okay, should I stay here or? That's up to you. You can stay at the farmhouse, or I can arrange for you to stay with your family if you prefer. Whatever makes you more comfortable. The offer surprised her. She'd expected him to dictate her movements, not give her choices. I'll stay here, Isabella decided. It's quieter, and Maria's good company. Raphael's smile suggested he was pleased by her choice, though he didn't say so directly. I'll make sure you have everything you need, and I'll call every evening, if that's okay with you, not to check up on you, he added quickly. Just to talk, if you want. I'd like that. The admission came easier than it should have. Despite everything, I think I'd miss our conversations. Despite everything, I think I'd miss you." The words hung between them, too honest, too revealing. Isabella felt her cheeks heat and looked away, focusing on her wine glass instead of Raphael's intense gaze.
They finished the meal in comfortable silence, then moved to the library where a fire crackled invitingly. Raphael showed Isabella his grandmother's collection of first editions, stories behind each acquisition, and she found herself genuinely interested in the glimpses of history and personality they revealed. "You should have these properly archived," Isabella said, handling a particularly fragile volume with care. "Some of these are probably quite valuable."
"Are you offering to take on the project?" Isabella paused, considering. "Maybe, if you trust me with them." "I trust you with far more than books, Isabella." The sincerity in his voice made her look up, and she found Raphael watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Don't look at me like that," she said quietly. "Like what?" "Like I'm something precious instead of something you acquired." Raphael crossed to her, moving slowly, deliberately. He took the book from her hands and set it aside with care, then cupped her face in his palms with unexpected gentleness. "You are precious," he said, his voice rough. "And I did acquire you, through circumstances neither of us would have chosen. Both things are true, Isabella. But I'm learning that maybe acquisition can transform into something else if both people are willing to let it." Isabella's breath caught. He was so close, his dark eyes searching hers, his touch careful despite the clear desire she could see written across his features. This was the moment, she realized, the moment where they could cross a line that had remained uncrossed since their wedding night, where she could choose, truly choose, to take their tentative connection somewhere more intimate. "Raphael, tell me to stop and I will." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "Tell me you're not ready and I'll walk away right now."
"But Isabella, if there's any part of you that wants this, that wants to see if we could be something more than just—" She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't the result of careful deliberation. Isabella simply leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his words, answering his question with action instead of speech. For a heartbeat, Raphael froze, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. Then he responded with a hunger tempered by restraint, kissing her back with a passion he'd clearly been holding in check for days. Isabella had been kissed before. Fumbling teenage experiments, a college boyfriend who'd been sweet but uninspiring. But this was different. Raphael kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus and intensity, as if she were the only thing that mattered in his entire universe. His hands remained gentle on her face despite the fierce need she could feel radiating from him. And that gentleness, that continued restraint even now, made something crack open in Isabella's chest. She'd been so sure he was a monster, so certain that kindness was just another manipulation, that any tenderness was simply control in a prettier package. But monsters didn't kiss like this, like they were terrified of breaking you, like you were something infinitely precious that needed to be handled with care. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Raphael rested his forehead against hers. "Isabella," he breathed, "we don't have to. I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm choosing this," Isabella interrupted, her voice shaky but certain. "I'm choosing you." "Not because I have to, not because of the contract or my family or any of it, but because I want to see where this could go. What we could become together." Raphael pulled back enough to search her eyes, looking for doubt, for fear, for any sign she didn't mean it. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his face. "Then we take this slowly," he said. "We figure it out together, at whatever pace feels right to you. No expectations, no demands, just us," Isabella finished, "trying to build something real from this mess we were both thrown into." "Just us?" Raphael agreed. He kissed her again, softer this time, sweeter, and Isabella let herself sink into it. Let herself imagine that maybe, impossibly, she could find something like happiness in this marriage she'd never wanted. It wouldn't be the fairy tale she'd dreamed of as a girl. There would be no erasing Raphael's past or his present, no pretending he was anything other than a dangerous man who lived in a violent world. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something real anyway. Something that honored both her need for choice and his attempts at becoming better. Something that acknowledged the darkness while reaching for light. It wasn't what Isabella had planned for her life, but standing in the firelight with Raphael's arms around her, his heart beating steady beneath her palm, she thought it might be enough. The night ended with Raphael walking Isabella to her door, still separate, because rushing this would ruin everything they were tentatively building. He kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her ache, then retreated to his own room with visible reluctance. Isabella climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, her lips still tingling, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she'd been telling her father she'd never forgive him. Now she was kissing the man who'd bought her hand in marriage, choosing to explore feelings she had no business developing for someone who represented everything wrong with the situation she was trapped in. She should be horrified at herself, should be maintaining her anger and resistance, refusing to make this easy for Raphael or for the circumstances that had bound them together. But Isabella was tired of fighting, tired of being angry every moment of every day, tired of holding on to resentment that was poisoning her more than it hurt anyone else. If there was a possibility, however slim, of finding some measure of happiness or at least peace in this marriage, wasn't she allowed to reach for it? Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. "Mama said you and Papa fought. Are you okay?" Isabella typed back quickly. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. Tell Mama not to worry. I'm figuring things out." She set the phone aside and closed her eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Isabella let herself imagine a future that might not be quite so dark after all, a future where she and Raphael found a way to navigate the contradictions of their union, where she maintained her sense of self while building something genuine with a man who was trying, however imperfectly, to be worthy of her willingness to try. It wasn't freedom, it might never be freedom, but it was choice, exercised within the confines of her cage, and that was something. That was everything, actually. And as Isabella drifted off to sleep, she thought about tomorrow, about Raphael leaving for Palermo, about the phone calls he'd promised and the conversations they'd continue building. She thought about the way he'd looked at her tonight, like she was something precious instead of something acquired. She thought about becoming someone new, not the girl who'd been sacrificed, but the woman who'd chosen to make the best of what she'd been given. Who'd chosen, despite everything, to try. It wasn't the ending Isabella would have written for herself, but maybe, just maybe, it could be a beginning worth fighting for. Raphael left for Palermo before dawn, pressing a kiss to Isabella's forehead as she drifted in that space between sleep and waking. She heard his whispered promise to call, felt the warmth of his hand on her cheek, and then he was gone, leaving only the scent of his cologne and an unexpected ache in her chest at his absence. Isabella spent the first day alone cataloging the emotions she'd been too busy surviving to examine. She walked the gardens, sat in the library with books she couldn't focus on, helped Maria prepare lunch despite the housekeeper's protests. And she thought about the kiss, about the choice she'd made, about the terrifying possibility that she was falling for a man who'd entered her life as a captor and was slowly transforming into something far more complicated. Raphael called that evening as promised, his voice rough with exhaustion. "How was Palermo?" Isabella asked, curling up in the window seat overlooking the darkening sea. "Productive, tedious. The usual combination of threats and negotiations that keep my empire running." She heard the rustle of fabric, imagined him loosening his tie, shedding the armor of his public persona. "How was your day?" "Quiet. I started organizing your grandmother's book collection. Maria thinks I'm crazy for wanting to catalog them by hand instead of just photographing the spines." Raphael's laugh was warm. "My grandmother would have loved you. She believed books deserved to be touched, understood, not just documented." They talked for an hour about nothing important, books and gardens and childhood memories. But beneath the casual conversation, Isabella felt the shift in their relationship, the way they were learning each other's rhythms and preferences, building something that looked surprisingly like intimacy. "I miss you," Raphael said as the call was winding down. "I didn't expect to, but I do." Isabella's heart stuttered. "I miss you too. Which is insane considering I barely know you and you essentially bought me like property. We're a study in contradictions, aren't we?" "That's one way to put it." "Isabella," Raphael's voice turned serious. "What we talked about before I left. What happened between us in the library. I need you to know it wasn't. I don't want you to think I'm manipulating you, that any of this is strategy.
I know. And surprisingly, she did. If you were manipulating me, you'd be much better at it. You wouldn't be this uncertain, this honest about not knowing what you're doing. Is it strange that I find that reassuring? Everything about this situation is strange, Raphael. We might as well embrace it. The second day brought unexpected visitors. Isabella was in the garden when she heard cars approaching, the crunch of gravel announcing arrivals. Her first instinct was fear. Raphael was gone. She was vulnerable. What if his enemies had discovered the farmhouse? But it was Marco who appeared on the terrace, Raphael's second-in-command looking apologetic and slightly uncomfortable. Mrs. DeLuca, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation that requires your attention. Isabella's stomach dropped. What kind of situation? Your father. He's here, and he's... Marco hesitated. He's not well, Signora. He's been drinking, and he's demanding to see you. Isabella's hands clenched into fists. I told him we were done. I made myself very clear. I know, but he's making a scene, and I thought you'd prefer to handle it privately rather than have my men remove him forcibly. Isabella followed Marco to the front of the house, where she found her father exactly as described, drunk, disheveled, and desperate. Antonio Romano was barely recognizable from the man who'd walked her down the aisle less than a week ago. His clothes were rumpled, his face unshaven, and his eyes held the wild look of someone spiraling. Isabella! He lurched toward her, and Marco stepped protectively between them. My daughter, please, I need to talk to you. We have nothing to say to each other. Isabella's voice was ice. I told you that yesterday. Please, you have to understand. Antonio's words were slurred, desperate. I had no choice. The debt was going to kill us all. I did what I had to do. You did what was easiest for you. Isabella felt anger rising, sharp and clean. You sacrificed me to save yourself, and now you want absolution? You want me to tell you it's okay, that I forgive you? I won't. But you're happy now, aren't you? Antonio gestured wildly at the farmhouse, the grounds, the obvious wealth surrounding them. DeLuca treats you well, gives you everything. You said so yourself. That doesn't excuse what you did. Isabella's control shattered. You don't get credit because the man you sold me to turned out to be less monstrous than expected. You gambled with my life, my future, my freedom, and the fact that it worked out doesn't make it right. I'm your father. You were my father. Isabella's voice broke. The man I called Papa wouldn't have done this. He wouldn't have looked at his daughter and seen a solution to his problems. He would have found another way, any other way, even if it cost him everything. Antonio's face crumpled. There was no other way. I looked, Isabella, I swear. You didn't look hard enough. Isabella was crying now. Years of being the dutiful daughter, the good girl who never caused trouble, finally breaking under the weight of betrayal. You could have sold the house, moved somewhere smaller, declared bankruptcy, asked friends for help. Anything but selling your own daughter to a crime lord. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Papa? Explain it to me. Make me understand how a father looks at his 23-year-old daughter and decides she's the price of his mistakes. Antonio opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. What could he say? What possible justification existed for what he'd done? That's what I thought. Isabella swiped at her tears angrily. You came here hoping I'd forgive you, hoping I'd make this easier on your conscience. But I won't. I can't. You destroyed my trust, Papa. You destroyed us, and no amount of guilt or apologies or drunken visits is going to fix that. Isabella, please. Marco, escort my father off the property. Isabella turned away, unable to look at him anymore. And make sure he understands he's not welcome back. She heard her father's protests, Marco's firm responses, the sound of Antonio being guided, not roughly, but inexorably, back to his car. Isabella stood with her arms wrapped around herself, shaking with anger and grief, and the terrible realization that she'd just severed the last tie to her old life. Maria appeared beside her with a gentleness that suggested she'd witnessed the entire scene. Come inside, Signora. I'll make tea. I don't want tea. Isabella's voice was hollow. I want... She stopped, unsure how to finish. What did she want? Her father to be different? The situation to be different? To go back in time and prevent any of this from happening? You want Mr. DeLuca. Maria said quietly. And he'll be home tomorrow. Until then, you come inside and let me take care of you the way I took care of him when he was hurting.
Isabella let herself be led inside. Let Maria fuss over her with tea and blankets in quiet comfort. And when Raphael called that evening, she broke down completely, telling him everything about her father's visit, about the confrontation, about the finality of cutting him out of her life. "I'm coming home," Raphael said immediately. "I'll leave Palermo tonight." "No." Isabella wiped her eyes. "Finish your business." "I'm okay, Raphael. I'm angry and sad and grieving, but I'm okay. I don't need you to rescue me." "Then what do you need?" "Just talk to me. Tell me about your day. Distract me from mine." So Raphael talked, his deep voice washing over her through the phone, telling stories about negotiations and old rivals and the peculiar politics of organized crime. And slowly, Isabella felt herself calming, anchored by his presence even across the distance. "I'm proud of you," Raphael said eventually, "for standing up to your father, for not letting him manipulate you into forgiving him before you're ready." "I don't know if I'll ever be ready." "Then you won't. That's allowed too." Raphael paused. "Isabella, I need to tell you something about the contract." Isabella's stomach clenched. "What about it?" "I had my lawyers draw up an amendment, or rather, a nullification." His voice was careful, measured. "The marriage contract that bound you to me in exchange for your father's debts, it no longer exists." Isabella sat up straight, her heart pounding. "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" "I mean I had it legally voided. The debts are still paid, your family is still protected, but you're no longer bound to me by contract. If you want to leave, Isabella, you can, right now, tonight, whenever. I won't stop you, and there won't be consequences for your family." The world tilted. Isabella gripped the phone with white knuckles, trying to process what Raphael was saying. "Why would you do that?" "Because I realized something these past few days. I don't want a wife who stays with me because she's legally obligated, or because leaving would endanger her family. I want—" Raphael's voice roughened with emotion. "I want you to choose me, Isabella, not because you have to, but because you want to. And you can't truly choose if you're not truly free." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. "Raphael, I know it doesn't erase how this started. I know I still benefited from your father's desperation, still played a role in trapping you, but I'm trying to make it right the only way I know how, by giving you back your freedom and hoping like hell that you'll choose to stay anyway." Isabella couldn't speak through the tightness in her throat, the overwhelming surge of emotions she couldn't name. "Take your time," Raphael continued quietly. "Think about what you want. And when I get home tomorrow, you can tell me your decision. Whatever it is, I'll accept it." "Okay," Isabella managed. "Okay." They said goodnight with I miss yous that felt heavier now, weighted with possibility and fear. Isabella set the phone down and stared at nothing, her mind reeling. She was free, truly free, for the first time since her father had told her about the marriage arrangement. She could leave, go anywhere, start over without Raphael or his criminal empire, or the complicated feelings she'd developed for a man who'd started as her captor. She could leave. The question was, did she want to? Isabella spent a sleepless night wrestling with the question. She made lists of reasons to stay and reasons to go, analyzed her feelings with the ruthless logic she'd once applied to literature papers, tried to separate what she genuinely wanted from what she'd been conditioned to accept. By dawn, she still didn't have an answer. Or rather, she had an answer she wasn't sure she trusted. Raphael returned just after noon, looking exhausted from the drive and tense, in a way that suggested he'd been dreading this conversation as much as she had. They faced each other in the library, the scene of their first kiss, and the air between them crackled with unspoken questions. "You meant it?" Isabella asked without preamble. "About the contract?" "Every word." Raphael pulled papers from his briefcase and handed them to her. "Official documentation from my lawyers. You're free, Isabella. Completely free." Isabella scanned the papers with shaking hands. Legal language, official stamps. Her name repeated throughout with terms like nullified and void and no further obligation. It was real. He'd actually done it. "Why?" she whispered. Raphael moved to the window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension. Because I've spent the last 3 days in Palermo making deals and threats, using power and fear to get what I want. It's what I'm good at, what I've built my life on. But with you, he turned to face her, and his eyes were raw. With you, I don't want to use power or fear. I don't want you to stay because you're trapped. I want you to stay because you choose to, every single day. And that means giving you the option to leave. Even if I do leave, even if I walk away right now, even then, Raphael's smile was painful. I'd rather lose you to your choice than keep you through obligation. At least then I'd know I'd done one decent thing in this whole mess. Isabella set the papers aside carefully. You're an idiot. Raphael blinked. Excuse me? You're an idiot, Isabella repeated, moving toward him. A wonderful, frustrating, complicated idiot who just gave away all his leverage because he wanted me to have a choice. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious? Isabella, I'm staying. The words came out firm, certain. I'm choosing to stay, Raphael, not because of the contract or my family or fear of what happens if I leave, but because in the past week you've shown me more respect and care and genuine effort to understand me than anyone else in my life. Because you're trying so hard to be better than what you are, and I want to see where that leads. Because when you kiss me, I feel alive instead of afraid. Raphael's expression transformed, hope and disbelief, and something that looked dangerously like love warring across his features. You're sure? Isabella, you need to be absolutely certain. I'm sure. Isabella closed the distance between them, taking his hands in hers. I'm not saying this is easy or simple or that I've forgiven everything about how we started, but I'm saying I choose this. I choose you. I choose to build something real with you instead of running from the possibility of it. Raphael pulled her into his arms so suddenly, so fiercely, that Isabella gasped. But there was nothing frightening about his embrace, just overwhelming relief and gratitude and the bone-deep need to hold on to something precious. I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of that choice, Raphael said against her hair. I swear it, Isabella. I'll be the best version of myself I can possibly be. You'll fail sometimes, Isabella said, pulling back to look at him. You'll make mistakes, do things that make me angry, probably order someone's hand broken at the worst possible moment. Probably, Raphael agreed with a rueful smile. And I'll call you on it every time. I'll challenge you and push back and refuse to just accept the status quo. I'm counting on it. Then we're agreed. Isabella smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile of her entire life. We're doing this. Building a real marriage from this disaster of a beginning. Together. Raphael cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. And Isabella kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it. The choice, the hope, the terrifying possibility of love. And let herself believe that maybe, impossibly, they could make this work. The next weeks unfolded with surprising ease. Raphael made good on his promise to be worthy of Isabella's choice, and she discovered layers to him she'd never suspected. The man who could order violence without flinching also spent hours helping her catalog his grandmother's books, debating the merits of different organizational systems with surprising passion. The ruthless crime lord who ruled through fear spent evenings teaching her to cook traditional Sicilian dishes, laughing when she burned the pasta and praising her when she finally got it right. They learned each other slowly, carefully, building intimacy through 1,000 small moments. Shared coffee on the terrace at sunrise. Raphael reading aloud from poetry collections while Isabella curled beside him. Heated debates about films and books that ended in laughter and kisses. Late-night conversations about their fears and hopes and the people they wanted to become. Isabella set boundaries and Raphael respected them. She told him when his work world encroached too much on their private life, and he adjusted. She pushed back when his protective instincts veered into controlling territory, and he listened. They fought, passionate arguments that cleared the air instead of festering, and learned that disagreement didn't mean disaster. And gradually, carefully, their relationship deepened into something neither of them had expected, but both desperately wanted. 2 months after the wedding, Raphael came home with news that made Isabella's blood run cold. There's a problem with the Valentino family, he said, his expression grim. They're challenging my control over the northern ports, claiming the alliance through our marriage isn't legitimate since... He stopped. Since what? Isabella prompted. Since we haven't, Raphael's discomfort was obvious. They're claiming the marriage hasn't been consummated, which makes it invalid under the terms of the original agreement. Isabella felt heat flood her cheeks. The truth was she and Raphael had been intimate, but only recently, and only after weeks of building trust and genuine desire for each other. The early nights of distance and separate rooms had been necessary for Isabella's healing, but apparently they'd also created a vulnerability Raphael's enemies could exploit. "What do they want?" Isabella asked. "They want me to prove the marriage is real, to show that you're actually my wife in every sense, not just on paper." Raphael's jaw clenched. "I told them to go to hell. Our private life is none of their business." "But they won't accept that." "No, they're looking for any excuse to break the alliance, to claim I violated the terms of the contract." Raphael paced the library with caged energy. "It's politics, Isabella. Power plays and territory disputes wrapped up in outdated notions of marriage and legitimacy." Isabella watched him for a long moment, an idea forming. "What if we didn't give them an excuse?" Raphael stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we made a public appearance together, showed them exactly how real this marriage is?" Isabella stood and moved to him. "Not by proving anything about our private life, which is frankly nobody's business, but by demonstrating that we're partners, that I'm not some trophy wife hidden away, but an active part of your world." "Isabella, my world is dangerous. I know. I've known since the day I married you. But Raphael, I'm tired of hiding, tired of being protected and sheltered while your enemies use my absence as ammunition against you." Isabella took his hands. "Let me stand beside you, publicly, visibly. Let me be your wife in the way that matters, not through consummate proof, but through partnership." Raphael looked at her with something close to awe. "You do that. Step into the spotlight, deal with the scrutiny and danger. I married you, didn't I? For better or worse, your world is my world now. I might as well claim my place in it." The gala was held a week later at a historic palazzo in Palermo, a gathering of Sicily's most powerful families, some legitimate, most operating in the shadows where Raphael ruled. Isabella prepared with Maria's help, wearing a dress that cost more than her old car, diamonds at her throat that represented more wealth than her father had gambled away. She looked like a queen. She felt terrified. "You don't have to do this," Raphael said as they prepared to leave. "I can handle the Valentino family without putting you in this position." "I know, but I want to do this. I want them to see that I'm not a victim or a pawn. I'm Isabella De Luca, and I chose to be here." She adjusted his tie, a wifely gesture that had become familiar and dear. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't threaten anyone before appetizers are even served." Raphael laughed and pulled her close. "I love you," he said, the words spilling out as if he couldn't hold them back any longer. "I know it's too soon. I know given how we started, I have no right to feel this way, but Isabella, I love you completely, utterly, more than I knew I was capable of loving anyone." Isabella's heart stuttered, then soared. "You're an idiot," she said, echoing their earlier conversation. "Because I love you too. Despite everything, because of everything, I love you, Raphael De Luca." They kissed with the desperate tenderness of people who'd found each other against impossible odds. And when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. The gala was exactly as intimidating as Isabella had feared. Everywhere she looked, powerful men and their perfectly polished wives watched her with calculation and curiosity. She felt their eyes tracking her movements, heard the whispers that followed in her wake. The sacrificial bride, the girl sold to settle debts, the trophy wife hidden away until now. But Isabella held her head high and kept her hand in Raphael's, and together they navigated the social minefield with surprising grace. She met his business associates with polite interest, deflected intrusive questions with practiced ease, and slowly, surely, showed everyone watching that she was far more than they'd assumed. The confrontation with the Valentino family came during dinner, when the patriarch, a man named Salvatore who looked like he'd stepped out of a different era, made his move. "De Luca!" he called across the table, his voice carrying deliberately. "I see you finally brought your bride out of hiding. We were beginning to think she didn't exist." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to their table. Isabella felt Raphael tense beside her, felt his instinct to defend, to attack. She squeezed his hand in warning. I've been settling into married life, Isabella said smoothly, her voice clear and confident. Getting to know my husband, making a home. I'm sure you remember those early days of marriage, Mr. Valentino, how important it is to build a strong foundation in private before stepping into the public eye. Salvatore's eyes narrowed. Some would say a marriage built on contracts rather than love has no foundation at all. Then some people would be wrong. Isabella met his gaze steadily. My marriage to Raphael began with a contract, yes, but what we've built since then, the partnership, the trust, the love, that's real in ways that have nothing to do with legal documents or political alliances. Easy words, Salvatore pressed. How do we know you're not just playing a role? That De Luca hasn't simply trained you well? Raphael started to rise, fury clear in every line of his body, but Isabella's hand on his arm stopped him. She stood instead, drawing every eye in the room. You want proof our marriage is real, Mr. Valentino? Fine. Here it is. Isabella's voice rang with conviction. I was sold into this marriage by my desperate father. I walked down that aisle terrified, certain I was marrying a monster who would use me and discard me. And I would have been justified in hating Raphael for his role in that, for accepting a bride who had no choice. The room was utterly silent now, everyone hanging on her words. But instead I found a man who gave me choices when he could have simply taken, who respected my boundaries when he could have ignored them, who freed me from our contract completely and gave me the option to leave, knowing I might actually go. Isabella looked at Raphael, let everyone see the love and respect in her eyes. I chose to stay. I chose to build a life with him. I chose to love him, not because I had to, but because he proved himself worthy of that love every single day. She turned back to Salvatore, her expression fierce. So yes, our marriage is real. More real than most marriages that began with romance and proposals, because we built it from nothing. We earned every moment of happiness, fought for every piece of understanding. And if you can't see that, if you still think I'm just playing a role, then you're not nearly as perceptive as you think you are. Isabella sat down to absolute silence. Then, from the far end of the table, someone began to clap. Others joined in, a ripple of applause that spread through the room until even Salvatore Valentino had to acknowledge her words with a grudging nod. Raphael's hand found hers under the table, gripping tight, and when she glanced at him, his eyes were bright with pride and love, and something that looked almost like tears. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Isabella was approached by woman after woman, wives and daughters of powerful men, all of them curious about the bride who'd stood up to Salvatore Valentino and won. She navigated conversations with growing confidence, no longer the terrified girl who'd been sold into marriage, but a woman who'd claimed her place and her power. On the drive home, Raphael pulled her close and kissed her temple. You were magnificent, he said. Absolutely magnificent. I've never been prouder of anyone in my entire life. I meant every word. Isabella settled against his shoulder. About choosing you, about loving you, about our marriage being real. I know, and that's what made it so powerful. Raphael was quiet for a moment. I need to tell you something about your father. Isabella tensed. What about him? He's been trying to contact me, asking for money, for help with new debts. Apparently, he never stopped gambling. He just got better at hiding it from your mother. Isabella's stomach turned. What did you tell him? I told him no, that I paid his debts once as part of our marriage contract, but that obligation is fulfilled. If he's created new problems, he'll have to solve them himself. Raphael paused. But I also told him that if he ever approaches you again, if he ever tries to manipulate or guilt you into helping him, I would personally ensure he regretted it. Raphael. I meant it, Isabella. You've cut ties with him for your own sanity and healing. I won't let him undo that progress because he can't face the consequences of his choices. Raphael's voice was firm. Your father made his bed. He doesn't get to climb into yours when it becomes uncomfortable. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. For protecting me from him. For understanding why I'm not ready to forgive. You may never be ready. That's okay too. They arrived home to find the farmhouse lit with candles, Maria having prepared a private celebration for their successful evening. She'd made Isabella's favorite dessert and left champagne chilling on the terrace before discreetly disappearing to give them privacy. Isabella and Raphael stood on the terrace overlooking the sea, glasses of champagne in hand, and looked at each other in the candlelight. "I have something for you," Raphael said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Isabella's breath caught. "Raphael, you already gave me a wedding ring." "This is different." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold band engraved with words in Italian. "It says chosen, not given. Because that's what you are, Isabella. Not a bride I was given through contracts and desperation, but a wife I was chosen by, despite everything. Despite who I am and what I've done and all the reasons you should have run." Isabella's tears spilled over as Raphael slipped the band onto her finger beside her engagement ring. "It's perfect. You're perfect. Well, not perfect. You're still an infuriating, overprotective, occasionally ruthless crime lord. But you love me anyway. But I love you anyway." Isabella set down her champagne and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I love you completely, Raphael De Luca. And I choose you. Every day. Forever. I choose you." Raphael kissed her with all the passion and tenderness he'd been holding back, and Isabella melted into him, into this life they'd built, into the impossible love that had grown from the worst possible beginning. They made love that night with a new depth of connection, celebrating not just their desire for each other, but the journey they'd taken together. From fear to trust, from obligation to choice, from strangers bound by contract to lovers bound by something far stronger. Months turned into years, and the life Isabella and Raphael built together exceeded anything she could have imagined during those dark first days. Raphael gradually transformed his business empire, using his power to create legitimate ventures alongside the criminal ones. He couldn't entirely leave his past behind. That world didn't work that way. But he could be strategic about the future. He established a foundation in Isabella's name, helping young women escape dangerous situations, providing education and resources to those trapped by others' debts. It was his way of atoning for how they'd met, his attempt to ensure no other woman ended up like Isabella had, sold, scared, and trapped. Isabella found her own purpose, her own power within the life they'd built. She became known not just as Raphael De Luca's wife, but as a force in her own right, advocating for victims, challenging the old ways, pushing for change in a world resistant to it. The girl who'd been sacrificed became a woman who saved others from similar fates. Her relationship with her family evolved over time. Lucia and Marco remained close, their bond strengthened by what she'd sacrificed for them. Her mother eventually found the courage to leave Antonio, moving into a small apartment Raphael helped her secure, rebuilding her life on her own terms. And Antonio himself, he faded from their lives, his gambling debts eventually catching up with him in ways Raphael refused to intervene with. Some people couldn't be saved from themselves. Isabella made peace with that. Made peace with a lot of things, actually. The anger that had fueled her those first months gradually transformed into acceptance, then something that might have been forgiveness, not of her father or the circumstances, but of herself for learning to find happiness despite everything. 5 years after their wedding, Isabella stood on the same terrace where she'd first confronted Raphael about his contradictions, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of fire. Raphael came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and their unborn child, pressing a kiss to her neck. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About that first week," Isabella admitted. "About how terrified I was, how certain I was that you were a monster and my life was over. Reasonable assumptions given the circumstances. And how wrong I was. Not about you being complicated or capable of terrible things, those parts were accurate, but about my life being over." She turned in his arms to face him. "It wasn't over, Raphael. It was just beginning. This life, this love, this family we're building. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." Raphael's smile was soft, his eyes shining with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "You saved me, you know, from becoming completely monstrous, from losing the last pieces of my humanity. You saved me by choosing to stay." "We saved each other," Isabella corrected. "You gave me freedom when you could have kept me caged. I gave you trust when I had every reason not to. We built something real from something broken, and that's what saved us both." Their daughter was born 3 months later in early spring, with her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Sophia after Raphael's grandmother, who'd believed in books and poetry and the power of second chances. Raphael held his daughter with the same careful tenderness he'd shown Isabella from the beginning, and Isabella watched him transform yet again, from ruthless crime lord to devoted father, proving that people could contain multitudes, could be multiple things at once. The christening was held at the same chapel where they'd married, but this time the ceremony was filled with joy instead of fear. Isabella stood beside Raphael, their daughter in her arms, and looked out at the gathered crowd. Marco and his wife, he'd become a successful doctor, just as Isabella had hoped. Lucia, now in university, studying law with dreams of changing the system from within. Their mother, finally free and building her own life. And Raphael's people, the families and associates who'd watched their marriage transform from transaction to genuine partnership. Salvatore Valentino was there too, his earlier challenges long since abandoned in the face of Isabella and Raphael's united strength. He caught Isabella's eye and gave her a small nod of respect, recognition that she'd proven herself in ways that mattered. After the ceremony, as they celebrated at the farmhouse with friends and family, Isabella found a quiet moment alone with Raphael in the library, where so much of their story had unfolded. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "How we started? The contract, the arrangement, all of it?" Raphael considered the question seriously. "I regret that you were put in that position. I regret that your father's desperation and my ambition created a situation where you had no real choice. But do I regret where it led us? Never. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Isabella. You and Sophia, you're my redemption, my purpose, my reason for trying to be better than what I was." "We're not your redemption, Raphael." Isabella took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You're not some villain who needed saving by a good woman's love. You're a complicated man who made both terrible and wonderful choices, who built an empire on ruthless pragmatism and then chose to temper that ruthlessness with love. You saved yourself by being willing to change." "We saved each other," Raphael echoed her earlier words. "Built something beautiful from something broken." They stood together in the library surrounded by his grandmother's books, the poetry and stories that had survived generations, and Isabella thought about the story they were writing. Not a fairy tale, never that, but something more real and precious. A story of two people who'd met in the worst possible circumstances and chose to build the best possible life. Years later, when Isabella told their daughter about how she and Raphael had met, she didn't sugarcoat it. She told Sophia the truth about the debts and the contract, about the fear and the anger, about the terrible beginning that almost destroyed them both. But she also told her about the choices they'd made, about Raphael giving her freedom when he could have demanded obedience, about Isabella choosing to stay when she could have left, about two broken people finding a way to heal each other through honest effort and genuine love. "The start of something doesn't define the whole story," Isabella told her daughter as they sat in the library, now filled with Sophia's picture books alongside the vintage poetry. "What matters is what you build from that beginning, how you transform obstacles into opportunities, how you choose love even when you have every reason to choose hate." Sophia listened with wide eyes, too young to fully understand, but old enough to grasp the essential truth, that her parents had fought for their happiness, earned it through sacrifice and compromise, and the daily choice to be better for each other. Raphael joined them, scooping Sophia into his arms with practiced ease. "Story time?" "Mama's telling me about the wedding," Sophia said, "about how you were scary at first." Raphael's eyes met Isabella's over their daughter's head, amusement and old pain mixing in his expression. "I was terrifying. Your mama was very brave to give me a chance." "And you were very brave to give me a choice," Isabella countered. They settled together on the sofa, their daughter between them, the life they'd built surrounding them in books and photographs and the accumulated evidence of love that had grown from the most unlikely soil. Outside, the Mediterranean sunset painted the sky in shades of hope, and the farmhouse that had once felt like a prison had transformed into the truest home either of them had ever known. The contract that had bound them was long since voided, destroyed, turned to ash in memory. But the vows they'd made since, the real ones, the ones built on choice and love and mutual respect, those would last forever. Isabella De Luca looked at her husband and daughter, at the life they'd created together, and felt gratitude wash over her. Not for the circumstances that had brought her here. She would never be grateful for that. But for what she'd built from those circumstances. For the strength she'd discovered in herself. For the love she'd found in the most unexpected place. For the family they'd become against all odds. Raphael caught her looking and smiled, the expression transforming his face from formidable to gentle. "What are you thinking?" "That we did it," Isabella said simply. "We took something that should have destroyed us and built something beautiful instead. We won, Raphael. Against all the odds, against everyone's expectations, including our own, we won." "We did," Raphael agreed, pulling her close while Sophia dozed between them. "And I'd do it all again. Every mistake and triumph, just to end up here with you." The sun set over the sea, casting golden light through the library windows, and the De Luca family sat together in the peace they'd earned. Their story hadn't started with love, but it had grown into something far stronger, a partnership built on choice, respect, and the daily decision to be better than their circumstances demanded. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And in the end, that was everything.